papel sa laboratory report. So we will be having a simple diagram mamaya. So I'll just turn off muna ang others para hindi ma... Okay. Alright, so we'll start. So your general biology quarter 1, modules 5 and 6 are, meron tayong class, laboratory report for these two na mga modules. So you will have to submit two na laboratory reports. One is for diffusion, which is on page 1, and the other one is osmosis, which is on page 6 of page 2 pala of module 6. So both on module 6 yan siya. Module 5 is actually introduction for the topic of passive and active transport, explanation kung paano yung characteristics and properties of a plasma membrane or the semi-permeable membrane. Then sa module 6 is all about passive transport. So ang module 7, which is the last module for quarter 1, is all about active transport. So yun siya magiging last na module. I've already talked to Sir Banggoy for it sa mga STEM G na mga students. So siya ang magdi-discuss next October 27. So yan siya na date ang ang active transport, which is the last na module before your summative test. So the summative test class is 60 items. May 60 items siya. Coverage niya is from modules 1 to 7. So self-learning na siya na ang coverage pala for modules 1 to 7 kasi galing man siya lahat din sa lahat ng modules. So if you're reading your modules, you will notice that the questions are actually just there, doon sa inyong modules. So doon siya manggagaling. So sa mag-study, so may isasagot. Sa mga hindi, so mag-start na kayo para hindi kayo magulat sa questions. Alright? So all 60 items, yun siya ang sasagutan ninyo. So for ito na yung yung modules 5, 6, and 7 is actually nasa introductory na kayo na portion ng biochemistry. So this is all about application of chemistry in biology na. Alright? So you will notice our topic today, mamaya, na puro na siya about biology. Okay. So we'll start with yung mga natin competencies for this one. So the competencies for this one actually will ask you to have meron kayong kailangan maintindihan ninyo yung plasma membrane, anong gamit ng isang plasma membrane, bakit siya semi-permeable na membrane, at ano yung difference between osmosis and diffusion na terms, ano yung examples of passive transport, and we will include later yung facilitative na type of passive transport. Okay? So let's start by discussing your yung lahat ng yung parts ng isang plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane class is actually meron tayo yung portion, yung model na ginagamit ngayon. So the one that we use is actually named as the fluid mosaic model. So yun siyang ginagamit na currently accepted by biologists. So that's actually just a theory. It's not yet totally proven, pero siya yung well-accepted na model for the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane, yung other niya na term is the cell membrane. Pero for this one, because it's not just the membrane itself, kaya siya hindi cell membrane lang, kasi ang natin is, it's a plasma membrane because there are other components and special na characteristics for that particular organelle na i-include natin. Okay, so ano yung gamit ng cells natin as a whole. So the cells are actually the ones that will control ano yung papasok kay cell, ano yung lalabas kay cell. So it will exclude some substances, particularly kung masyado siyang malaki. If it is most likely yung mga polar substances or polar na mga mga chemicals are actually those that are meron silang positive and negative charges. So the ones that are too polar or ganun siya na type of substance, it's actually usually excluded from the cell. Except that there are some membrane proteins that can allow them to enter the cell. So mamaya makikilala nyo ang ibang membrane proteins. Okay, so another thing is that the cells can take in other cells. So halimbawa, pag may namatay na mga other cells, it can take it in. Remember yung sa lesson natin last time that we had, kung may mga apoptotic na mga cells, it is recycled again by other cells using their lysozymes. And the cells can also eliminate other substances. Halimbawa, may substance siya na nagawa, pero pwede niya rin yung gawing, halimbawa, gusto niyang gawing parang tatanggalin niya or ipapadala niya sa ibang cells. So those are some of the things that the cell can send out. Okay, so this is your plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane class is quite different from your cell wall. Kasi si cell wall class is just layers of lignin, ganun lang siya. So hindi siya rigid and it is moving around, constantly moving around. Para siyang amoeba na it has like pseudopods, pero hindi siya pseudopods kasi ang gagamitin niya. Okay, so for this one, this is the current na fluid mosaic model of the plasma membrane. So meron tayo yung mga membrane proteins. Okay, the one that actually allows your coronavirus to enter the cell is actually a membrane protein. So it's the ACE2 na receptor. So it's a receptor protein. So these are also other na mga components na makikita mo sa iyong plasma membrane. You have the glycolipids here. And you have your glycoproteins. Glyco means it's partly carbohydrate. So kapag sinabi mong lipid, it's fat na material. Pero ang class kasi nila is lipids mismo. Kapag sinabi mong lipid, that's included na yung fats doon. Okay. So this is also a carbohydrate, plain carbohydrate. And you have here cholesterol. So, i-explain ko mamaya kung anong gamit ng bawat isang ganyan. So, ano yung uses nila? Bakit may cholesterol pala? May cholesterol pala ang cells mo. Okay, on its own, meron kang cholesterol in all of your cells. So, ginagamit yan siya actually for the semi-permeability of the cell. Okay? So, let's go to ano yung history ng plasma membrane. Paano siya naisip na ganun ang mukha ng ating plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane is just medyo old na siya na discovery, pero in terms of scientific discovery about the cell, it's actually quite recent. Recent na yung 1890s. Remember that the cell was discovered mga 1600s, late 1600s na. So medyo matagal-tagal si plasma membrane na discover actually. And the components is actually discovered 2 decades later, almost 2 decades later, which is in 1915. So ang unang model was actually hindi yung fluid mosaic na alam natin ngayon, na dinidiscuss natin ngayon. It's actually the railroad track or the sandwich model. The sandwich model actually class is just yung wala siyang laman. Like compared to this one, yung kanina natin dito, wala itong laman. Purely phospholipid bilayer lang yan siya. These are actually your phospholipids. Yung blue na may tails na black, yan siya. Okay, so this is your phospholipid layer. Purely lang ganyan lang siya. So kaya siya tinatawag nila na railroad track or sandwich model. It's because of the phospholipid bilayer. The railroad term is actually referring to this one, this mga saturated and unsaturated na mga fatty acids, itong tails. So these are actually fats. Ito siya na portion dito. Okay, so yan siya ang nire-refer niya. But this one actually cannot explain yung semi-permeability of the cell. So kaya tayo nagkaroon ng mga parang studies na okay, isn't acceptable because hindi niya kayang i-explain some of the characteristics of a cell, including its semi-permeability. So here comes in 1950s na meron tayo yung parang improvement of our electron microscopes. Noon kasi yung mga electron micrographs natin, it was just very simple and hindi siya ganun kaganda yung mga makapture niya na images, not very clear. But later on, we had transmission electron microscopy. So, yung TEM natin, yun siya ang parang naging way to see inside the cell more clearly. So, from Singer and Nicholson in 1972, this was the model. Accepted na siya since 1950s and until today. So we had 70 years na of almost 70 years na of enjoying this type of model. So wala pa namang so far mga news about anong bago sa cellular na membrane. So until today, fluid mosaic model pa rin tayo. Okay? So constantly changing naman ang science ng biology. Right. So, what is your plasma membrane pala? Okay, bakit siya semi-permeable? Anong meron sa kanya? So, si plasma membrane class, remember that it is your cell membrane. So, it defines the shape of your cell. It outlines its borders. Siya yung parang gate or wall ng lahat ng mga contents ng cell mo. So, siya din yung nagde-determine kung ano yung magiging interaction ng inyong cell sa environment niya, like towards other cells or foreign bodies or extracellular contents, yung sa labas ng isang cell. So, siya yung nagde-determine anong laman, anong nasa kay plasma membrane, yun ang magde-determine. So, it is built by the endoplasmic reticulum. Remember, si endoplasmic reticulum can build everything. Okay, sinong nag-raise ng hand? Can you type in your concern sa chat box? Okay, so meron tayo yung sa endoplasmic reticulum ang magbi-build, then si Golgi apparatus ang magse-send out towards the cell membrane sa mga na-build na parts. So sila yung it's actually quite simple lang ang parts niya, just a row of phospholipids, some of the proteins na idadagdag, which is still made up by the endoplasmic reticulum. Kasi proteins is meron tayong ribosomes. Okay, so doon din sa plasma membrane class, kailangan din siya ng cell because it is used for identifying anong cells lang anong klaseng cells lang ang pwedeng makipag-interact sa cell na iyan. Anong cell din ang yung sa host na cell or foreign na body na cell. Like, halimbawa, paano niya nalaman that it's a coronavirus? Bakit niya kayang atakihin ang rhinoviruses? Or this is a bacterium? Or this is a parasite like your Ascaris lumbricoides? Paano niya makikilala? So, there is a part in your plasma membrane that is used for self versus non-self na distinction or recognition. At ginagamit siya plain for immune system, which is ibabalikan natin ito by quarter 4. Yan siya na topic itong nasa about the surface. Okay, i-discuss yan siya in detail sa quarter 4. Okay, so mainly sa ngayon ang magiging trabaho natin is just to ito siya determining the nature of interaction with the environment. So yan na siya magiging goal natin for this modules 5 and 6. Okay, so dahil sa si plasma membrane is the one that will separate the cell from the external environment. External environment, we call it extracellular cell, surface or environment. O ang sa loob ng cell is intra. From the word na intra means sa loob, extra means sa labas. Okay, so it will control the passage of your molecules in and out of the cell. Kung halimbawa, papasok ba sila, hindi sila pwedeng pumasok. And it is present in all living organisms. So lahat ng organism, whether it's a prokaryote or a eukaryote, it's a bacteria, animal, a plant, a fungi, or protist, so they all have plasma membranes. So lahat sila, meron silang lipid na bilayer, phospholipid actually, a bilayer na merong littered with proteins or glycoproteins, glycolipids, ganun. So meron siyang ganyan. So ano yung chemical properties ng structure? Okay, paano tayo nakaka-determine na sinong pwedeng pumasok, sino ang hindi? Okay, so let's determine first ano yung nasa loob niya. Okay, si plasma membrane class is made up of mainly talaga it's the lipids. Okay, yung lipids na nasa ano niya, sa layer niya is we have the phospholipids and we have the cholesterol. For magsa-study ng medicine or allied health na mga professionals na mga careers, we will have a separate na topic after October 27 kasi meron kayong special na topic for biochemistry, all about biomolecules. Okay? So kayo yung mag-a-attend nun. So another thing na part natin is meron tayo yung proteins. Okay? And we have the third one, we have carbohydrates. So yun siya ang nasa inyong plasma membrane. So ganun siya ka out of the 4 biomolecules, you have actually 3 in your plasma membrane. Ang wala lang kay plasma membrane is actually the nucleic acids because it's stored in the nucleus, which is your DNA. Okay? So, ito yung parts ng phospholipids. Okay, class. Nandyan yan siya sa inyong module 5. Okay, in your module 5, you will see ano yung parts ng isang phospholipid. Okay, let's discuss them one by one at para maintindihan natin yung behavior ni cell. Okay, so mostly, meron tayo yung phospholipid na layer. Kapag sinabi mo lang layer lang, ang ibig sabihin just one layer. Pag sinabi mong bi-layer, that means you are referring to two stuck together. Okay, so ito siya ang bilayer. This one is just simply a layer. Ito siya na nasa itaas. So, if it's just a layer, you will notice how, ano yung kaya niyang i-repel at ano yung kaya niyang i-accept na side. Okay, so for this one, remember that this is, kanina sinabi ko, diba, that this tails, itong dalawang ito, is actually your unsaturated or saturated fatty acids. Fatty acids are monomers of your yung inyong fats or lipids. So sila yung medyo, remember that like attracts like, 'di ba sa chemistry. So dahil sa they are fats or fatty acids, they actually like very much your oil, okay, or any mga substances that are actually non-polar. Okay, it's because this one, yung hydrophobic natin, remember phobia means fear of, and hydro means water, so they do not like water because they repel water because they are made up of lipids or fats. So they just like something na kapareho din sa kanila in oil na solution or meron kang fats in that solution. So the only ones that they can allow into your cell, normally ito na side is just they face towards anything that is non-polar or meron siyang fats. Okay, another thing is we have your hydrophilic heads. Okay, your hydrophilic heads naman class is made up of your phosphates na group. Ito siya is the circle ones. The circle is actually because of the phosphate na group. Ang phosphate kasi class is PO4. That's your chemical na formula. And ang P doon stands for phosphorus, O stands for oxygen. And dahil sa may apat na oxygen sa O4, okay, ang ibig sabihin, iniikutan niya lahat ang isang phosphorus na molecule. So, meron kang isang phosphorus na atom and you have four oxygen atoms circling around it. So, kung mayroon kang apat na para siyang circle na. Kaya it's represented in drawings as a circle. Okay, so it's actually, bakit siya hydrophilic? It's because it attracts water. This part actually attracts water. Bakit siya nag-a-attract ng water? Because this is a highly polar substance, ang phosphate na group sa itaas. Okay, ang phosphate na group din class sa itaas is actually negatively charged. So, ang mas ina-attract niya actually at this part is actually those that are positively charged. Kaya siya mostly, ang mga nasa labas kasi ng cell are mostly mas madaling mahatak yung mga positively charged particles. Kaya kagaya ng calcium ions, your magnesium ions, they are, magnesium is 2+. Your calcium is 2+ din. So, that's the ionic na compounds, those are the ones that are highly attracted dito na side. So, what if it's a bilayer, which is just like your plasma membrane? Okay. If it is just like your plasma membrane class, notice that it is here. Ito siya, dalawa na. So, meron kang ito na layer, which is nag-face dito. Ito siya. So, and another layer here below. And you have here this hydrophobic region. Napapansin niyo saan ang mas makapal na region, which this is your hydrophobic region. Yung part na non-polar substances ang most likely kayang i-accept. Okay, notice then that this portion here and this portion here are the polar na substances ang kayang i-accept because these are hydrophilic regions. They can attract ionic substances, like also like to attract substances that are dissolved in water. Okay, so unfortunately for them, ito siya na portion repels substances na who loves water. Kasi this one is the region na ayaw ng tubig. Okay, so this one is medyo fatty ito na layer. So this is medyo immersed in oil na portion. So remember, di ba, may ano kayo actually, may practice exercise kayo na parang mini experiment in module 5 that you have to perform, which is may lalagay kayo na na parang meron kayong water, then you will top it off with a droplet of oil. So that's actually an experiment to see the behavior, to actually know the behavior of your plasma membrane. Ganun siya ang behavior niya. Remember that oil is actually less dense than water, kaya siya it floats. And another thing is that it remains as yung parang concave na disc on top of the surface of the water. It's because it is hydrophobic na substance. So, remember na hindi mo siya kayang parang ipapalapit sa isa't isa and they do not mix with each other. So, hindi siya nadidissolve in water. So, it's because they do not mix well with water. Right? So, ganyan siya ang behavior ng phospholipid natin inside our cell. Kaya nga, meron tayong membrane proteins. It's because this portion here is masyado lang talagang choosy sa pwede niyang papasukin. So, hindi siya gusto may papasok na polar substances, and ayaw niya din ng anything that is dissolved in water. So, mamaya makikita natin ano lang yung pwedeng papasukin niya mainly by itself, si plasma membrane. Okay, so anong babalikan natin yung terms na polar, non-polar, and meron tayong i-introduce na bagong term, amphiphilic, and later meron naman tayong amphipathic. Okay, so meron tayong bagong term mamaya. So balikan natin ano yan siyang terms. So let's go to this one. Let's dive in deeper kung ano yung nasa phospholipid natin. Okay. Kung ano sige man tag-phospholipid, ma'am, na osmosis o diffusion man ta, ma'am. Actually, class, you have to understand this first before you understand the term osmosis. Okay? So, meron tayo yung phospholipid. Yung phospholipid nating class is actually made up of a 3-carbon na glycerol. Okay, meron tayong 3 carbons here na glycerol na na backbone na mayroon siyang attached. Ang glycerol is actually attached to two na tails of fatty acids. So, the tail can either be both saturated or saturated, unsaturated. So, it's actually mix na ng dalawa. So, or pwede din siya both unsaturated yung tails. So, may tatlo kayong combinations na possible for this tail. So, meron siyang dalawang hydrophobic tails. And meron kang hydrophilic head, glycerol, because glycerol is very attractive to water. Kung makabili kayo niyan, may ano kasi niyan sa mga pharmacies, ang glycerol, kasi that's actually ginagamit natin for like mga dispensers for your yung sa kamay natin, alcohol, sinasali yan siya because it can be dissolved in alcohol too. So, it's because it really loves water. So, it's attractive to water. And makikita ninyo, glycolic acid is actually nasa inyong mga cosmetic products. Okay? So, nasa cosmetic products yan siya. Kasi it's a hydrating na molecule. Alright? So, because it attracts water, it keeps water in. Kaya siya nasa mga moisturizers yan siya, ang glycolic acid. So, glycerol, glycolic acid is actually the acid form. Glycerol is the alcohol form from the ol. Okay, so balikan ninyo yung mga lessons ninyo sa chem. Right, so this is your phosphate. Okay, the phosphate here, class, you notice that it has a negative na charge. You will see that in your module. Meron kang meron kayong apat na oxygen here. So this is the one that will be attracting the water towards it. Pero this portion here is the one that will repel water. Ito siya na portion. Your hydrophobic na tail. Okay. Notice then that there is a difference between a saturated na fatty acid here and an unsaturated fatty acid. So si unsaturated class is meron yan siyang double bond. Okay, and the double bond class actually gives it the kink. Ang tawag natin kink in biology. Kasi it will make it parang bend. So meron siyang bending. There is actually a certain degree of bending for it. So it will actually improve the semi-permeability of a membrane of the cell. So isa yan siya sa mga adaptations ng plasma membrane. So another thing that you need to understand about the chemical na characteristics of your phospholipid is that it is dual loving. So meron siyang positive negative charge because this is a positive na charge ang inyong phosphate. It can attract it's a negatively charged particle, so it can attract positively charged particles. Remember, di ba, that opposites attract na rule sa chemistry din. The negative attracts the positive. So, yun siya ang sa inyong chemistry na yung sa mga charged natin na particles. And another thing is, meron din siyang uncharged na portion, si phospholipid. This one here. Wala yan siyang charged ang tail. Okay, because it is non-polar. It doesn't have any charge. So, because it wala siyang charge, so it does not form extra na hydrogen bonds. Ang nag-form ng extra na hydrogen bonds, which sa mga bonding natin, this one, it's the head. Kaya nga kanina, di ba, yung sa dito siya na portion, ito, siya ang nakaharap sa water na part. It's because the water is the universal solvent natin. Remember, yan siya? And the universal solvent carries your substances like minerals. They attract the minerals towards it and they are dissolved into your water. So, si water nagkikarry ng minerals na iyan towards here para si cell ang magte-take in. So, nasa kay plasma membrane actually ang power lahat na para kay cell. Okay? Ganun siya ka-powerful na portion na part of your cell. Right, so let's go here. Balikan natin. This is the space filling model ng inyong plasma membrane. So, balikan natin. This is your polar hydrophilic head. Ganyan siya. And this is your non-polar hydrophobic tails. So, you just notice, class, gaano kakapal itong non-polar hydrophobic tails. Kaya nga, may special proteins tayong ginagamit and we have the power of diffusion and osmosis to allow substances to enter into the cell. So, dito na ginagamit ni cell yung power of potential energy. Okay, halimbawa, if outside of the cell is meron tayong malaking non-polar na mga substances and marami sila, so they can go down the gradient. So, from higher, remember kung halimbawa marami sila dito na portion outside of the cell and they want to enter inside the cell, halimbawa dito is inside the cell, dito na portion. So, ang ibig sabihin, they just need to use the power of potential energy. So, ano siya? From higher to lower concentration. So, bababa lang siya. So, doon siya gagamitin niya para makapasok. So, what if, ma'am, kay dili man siya makalusot ang mga polar substances? Halimbawa, it's a charged molecule. So, doon napapasok ang ating facilitative and active transport. Or we have also the bulk transport, which is under your active transport. Alright? So, doon siya papasok na ang mga ganun na types of transportation of molecules. Alright? So, let's go na naman to ano naman ang shapes na kaya i-gawin ni phospholipid. Okay. Ito, kung ano lang siya, parang flat lang siya na arrangement, it's just what we call as sheet. Okay. Commonly kasi sa mga drawings ninyo, class, sa mga makikita ninyo sa internet, is just a plain sheet. Pero ang totoo talaga niya, kung as a cell, it's this one, parang spherical siya na form. It's a lipid na bilayer. So, dito ang cell na contents. It's just quite small kasi yan lang nasa libro ninyo. If you look into your textbook, nasa page 81 yan siya ng inyong textbook class. Okay? Kung may textbook kayo dyan. Or if you have the e-copy of the textbook, just go into the plasma membrane na topic. Alright? So, you just need to type in sa inyong PDF na search button for the plasma membrane. So, makita ninyo ito siya na figure 3.4, so that means on chapter 3. Okay, so nandito siya din, ito siya na portion here. Ito ang single na layer. Halimbawa, ang substance na dinala ni cell is actually a solution that is fatty ang substance. So, halimbawa, kung fatty naman siya, class, it doesn't need a lipid na bilayer ang vesicle na mag-e-enter kay cell. Ang gagawin ni cell is magpipinch off lang siya ng single na layer ng lipid na sphere. So, yan siya magiging shape ng vesicle mo. Single lang na layer. Kung naman siya, ang content ng cell is fatty acid. Pero kung ang content ni cell is Halimbawa, nagdala si cell, nagpapasok siya ng malalaking molecules. Ang gagamitin kasi na is by bulk transport kasi ang gamit kapag mga ganito na vesicles. So bulk transport ito. Dito papasok yung phagocytosis nyo, yung pinocytosis, ganun. So, ito yung gagamitin nila, the shape, this one, vesicles. Ito na mga vesicles ang gagamitin. At ito din ang magiging mukha ng cell mo, the lipid na bilayer shape. Okay? So, just remember class ha, meron tayo yung portion that is hydrophilic. Okay, ito na portion, yung mga circles na portion. Near that is the hydrophilic na areas of the cell. So they are in contact with the aqueous na fluid, both inside and out of the cell, and they are the ones who will be forming hydrogen bonds with water and the substances inside your water, which are polar molecules. Remember ha, pag polar, meron kang positive and negative na charge. It's either a positive molecule or a negatively charged molecule. And next is you have two meron ka ring water-hating na areas of the cell. So it's actually the non-polar na mga substances ang kanya niya lang dadalhin. So kapag nilagay mo si cell class sa isang tubig, halimbawa, it's a water solution. So napansin kapag ginawa na niyo na yung mini experiment in module 5, you will notice that it will form like a ball. Parang medyo spherical siya. It's a concave na type of ball. Yung yung droplet mo ng oil. So you will notice that it will cluster together and they do not interact with water. Halimbawa, maglagay ka na, di ba may part dyan na maglagay ka ng second na droplet of oil and you are to move it around and towards another yung oil mo na droplet. So you will notice that way they will cluster together. They will group together but they do not mix with water. Okay. Yung mga natin, products like cosmetic products natin like the oils, your food like your mayonnaise, it's actually an emulsion. You force the liquids of water and water molecules and your oil together. Yun siyang emulsion natin. Pero that's for chemistry na ninyo yan siya, yung basic chemistry under kay Sir Seri, yan siya na lesson. But for here class, you just need to understand that there are two parts kung saan haharap ang iyong phospholipid na bilayer. Mayroon siyang hydrophilic na region, the one that loves water so much, and the one that is actually hydrophobic na region, the one that hates water so much. Okay? So, yun siyang ating phospholipids na bilayer. Right? So, ano yung nasa plasma membrane natin? Okay, balikan natin yung natin kanina. Meron tayong yung phospholipids, meron tayong cholesterol, meron din tayong proteins. So, the answer for this one question is all of the above. Okay, so super easy. Alright, so balikan natin ha. So meron tayo yung parts of your phospholipid na bilayer, the fluid mosaic model. So meron tayo yung cell membrane here. Okay, ito siya, the phospholipid na bilayer. Okay, included din ang cholesterol dyan. Mamaya i-explain ko anong gamit ni cholesterol. We have here channel proteins. Mamaya i-explain ko din anong gamit nila. And we have here your carbohydrates. Anong gamit ng carbohydrates doon sa inyong plasma membrane. At bakit? Napapansin niyo siya, nasa labas lang siya ni cell. Hindi siya actually nasa loob, nasa labas siya ni cell. So let's know them all. Okay, so ano yung structure ng plasma membrane that will support the permeability of the cell? If you have your textbook, go to page 78. Okay, I have here my textbook too. So we'll just read them together here. Okay, we have here at 78. Okay, so you have there structure and components of the plasma membrane. So yan siyang nasa inyong nasa discussion ninyo. So meron kayo dyan components and functions of the plasma membrane. So if you have your textbook, you can open it to page 78, which is on chapter 3. And for those na walang textbook, you can open using the textbook na material na e-textbook, electronic na textbook na binigay ko sa Google Classroom. You can check it out sa Google Classroom. Right, let's go to here. So, meron tayong actually membrane proteins. Marami tayong types of membrane proteins and that is included in your module 5. Okay. So, meron tayo yung channel proteins. Pag sinabi mo kasing channel, it rhymes with the word tunnel. Actually, meron siyang tunnel. Okay. So, it will allow certain substances through your channel na protein. Mostly, ang channel na protein class, they are used for facilitative na diffusion. So, facilitative na diffusion, it's because hindi siya kailangan ng energy. Mostly, ang mga channel proteins class, they are under passive transport. They do not require energy. So, mostly nagagamit ng energy are here, itong transport proteins. Transport proteins kasi class are normally carrier proteins. That's their another term for them. Pag sinabi mong transport or carrier, taga bit-bit. So, from one side of the cell, like the extracellular space, into the intracellular space. So, siya yung parang entry point, parang gate ng mga substances na halimbawa, they are hydrophilic in nature, they are polar substances, they are too large, medyo malaki siya na molecule. So, dito siya pinapapasok gamit kay transport proteins. Dito din nagpapapasok din ito siya ng positively charged or negatively charged particles, si transport proteins or carrier proteins. Another is we have your cell recognition protein. This one, ito siyang tatlo na hexagonal structures. These are carbohydrates. Okay. Remember kanina nag-mention ako about coronavirus. The coronavirus actually uses the ACE2 receptor. Okay, so we have the angiotensin converting enzyme. Yan siya meaning ng ACE, kaya siya ACE2. It's angiotensin converting enzyme 2 na type of enzyme protein, enzymatic na yan siya na protein, na it's a type of a recognition protein. So, yan siya ang hinahack ng coronavirus to enter your cell. So, it's a type of a cell recognition protein. Okay, another is we have your receptor proteins. Receptor proteins class are enzymatic na type of proteins. So, napapansin niyo ito. Okay. We will have a separate lecture for that sa quarter 2 kasi gagamitin natin yan siya for photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Marami tayong cell receptor proteins na i-discuss sa quarter 2. Okay? So, yan siyang gagamitin natin. Ang gamit nila class is, this is your enzyme protein and this is your substrate. So, it's actually a substrate enzyme complex, ang receptor proteins. Pwede din siya na, halimbawa, this is an inhibitor, halimbawa, hindi mo na i-activate yung enzyme na iyan na protein. So, pwede din na this is an inhibitor. So, I will be explaining that too in module 1 and 2. Yan siya na discussion sa quarter 2. Right. We have enzymatic proteins. So, these are actually enzymes, ang dalawa. Pero meron din tayong very particular na types of other na mga membrane proteins. So, we have enzymatic proteins. Pero usually kasi class, they are a mix of glycolipids or glycoproteins. So if it's a glycoprotein, it's carbohydrate protein na complex na combination. It's a glycolipid. If it's a glycolipid, it's a carbohydrate and lipid na substance na membrane protein. And we have also junction proteins. Junction class, pag sinabi mong junction, ginagamit siya ni cell para to recognize other cells. Like, halimbawa, ay, kapareho ko to siya na cell. It's actually a body cell, another somatic na cell. So, they tend to stick together kasi remember sa isang cell, sa isang tissue na makikita ninyo yan siya, I'll be showing you sa mga later natin mga lessons na nagdidikit-dikitan yan sila. So, how do they know each other? Alam niya na, I belong to this group. This is my type of layer ng cells. So, yung ginagamit nila is actually junction proteins. Yan siya. So, maraming nasa plasma membrane natin which is used by the cell to allow certain substances. So, these are the other examples, main types na makikita natin sa ating cell membrane. Okay. So, these are the terms. Nandyan yan siya sa inyong, na-discuss ito earlier sa module 2 natin. Pero we'll discuss it in further detail today sa plasma membrane natin na lesson. Okay, so we have transport. The key term for this is cross the membrane. So meron tayong cross, means they can transport substances from one side of the cell, like the extracellular, towards the intracellular space, or intracellular towards the outer na space, which is the extracellular space of the cell. We have also the channel proteins. So, they form tunnels. Ang keyword dito is tunnel kasi they help import na substances. Halimbawa, common kasi sa channel proteins class yung mga kailangan ipalabas kaagad. Kaya siya kailangan yung parang parang mabilisan na labas-pasok. So, si channel proteins actually ang ginagamit dyan. And mainly, ginagamit natin yan siya kay water. So, we have those types. Mamaya ipapakilala ko anong type ng channel protein ang ginagamit natin for water. So, remember si water is, it's actually a polar substance kasi hindi yan siya makakapasok kaagad kay plasma membrane. Remember the hydrophobic region na tails. So, hindi siya kaagad makakapasok. Ginagamitan yan siya ng channel proteins, membrane proteins. We have cell recognition. Recognition means distinguish. Yan siyang keyword natin dyan. So, they know which is a pathogen. Pag sinabi mong patho means disease. Gen means it can create diseases. So, it can form diseases. So, if it's a pathogen, that means siya yung tagadala ng sakit. So, yan ang ginagamit ng ating cells. Remember yung ACE2 receptor natin kanina. So, yan siyang ginagamit ng cells to recognize sino ang hindi pwedeng papasok, sino ang pwedeng papasok. Okay, next is we have your cytoskeleton. Ang cytoskeleton naman class is used by the cell to actually maintain its shape. Remember si plasma membrane, wala kang nakikita doon na rigid na portion actually. The one that will allow the cell to become rigid, partly rigid, kasi hindi siya dapat maging too rigid kasi hindi na makakapasok ang substances talaga sa kanya. Kaya nga 'di ba nag-undergo ng hibernation ang mga plants natin during winter kasi masyado siyang malamig kasi nagiging rigid na yung cells natin during the time. So, plants and animals undergo hibernation during that time because this part, yung mga fats natin during that time is actually medyo tigas na. So, kung halimbawa, hindi siya winter, so most likely, si cytoskeleton na nag-give ng shape and motility for your cell. Kasi medyo nag-move yan siya. Remember yung lesson natin about microfilaments, microtubules, intermediate filaments. Those are examples of your cytoskeleton. Okay? Next is we have your junction. The junction actually class is ginagamit ng cell for cell-to-cell adhesion. Like, didikit ako sa kapareho kong uri ng cell. So, halimbawa, they are all pseudostratified na mga types of cells. These are all mga cuboidal na cells. Doon sila na mga para mag-form ng one layer of tissue. Okay, so paano siya nakaka-form ng isang tissue, set ng tissue ang ganitong sets ng cells. So they are using junction na membrane proteins. Okay? They also use that to communicate between cells. They send messages through the junction membrane proteins. So medyo higher na yan siya. We will be discussing that one sa quarter 4. So in the meantime, you just need to know what type of membrane proteins do we have. Then the last one, we have your receptor. The receptor actually can change its shape. Okay, ito yung pinaka-amazing about the substances in your plasma membrane. Halimbawa, class, hindi siya, it's a substance that actually require yung parang very special kind of transport. Okay, so paano siya papapasukin kay cell? So meron tayo yung receptor protein, that the one that will change itself para to accommodate the substance into the cell. So siya yung yung parang nanay na I have to be lenient to my child, or halimbawa, para siyang friend mo na I have to accept my friend in all its parang kalikian or kaanuhan. Ganun siya na type ng membrane protein. So it's actually the membrane protein that can change itself kasi it's an enzymatic na protein kasi ang receptor na membrane protein to allow specific molecules. So ang ligand actually, class, it's actually a gated na channel na protein to bind to it. So pwede siyang mag-change itself, then pwede na siya makagawa ng channel protein to allow the substance through into or out of the cell. So, ganun ka-special ang ating substances into the cell. So, ganito ang gamit natin. We have here an example of how a cell surface receptor na type of membrane protein to allow specific molecules through the cell. So, halimbawa, may mga kasi tayo, class, mga cell surface receptors that are actually very specific in nature. So, kapag enzymatic siya, class, hindi yan siya mag-aalaw ng substances na, halimbawa, if it's something na the chemical structure is actually hindi siya magkamukha ng shape. So, hindi yan siya makakapasok. Notice this one actually bounced off. Okay, it's because the shape of this molecule does not conform, cannot conform to this shape. So, hindi siya parang, it's not the perfect na key na susi sa lock mo. It's, ang tawag kasi natin in biology for this is a lock and key model. We'll be discussing it in quarter 2 pa muna. Pero for this one, you just need to understand that certain substances are not allowed into the cell dahil sa the shape of the chemical structure of that molecule is not conforming to the shape that is allowed by the cell. So, ganun ang coronavirus, class. It's actually, there is a certain shape for that particular na enzyme, yung ACE2 natin, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 na, na membrane protein na pwede niyang papasukin. And the first na variants, actually, the original variant is not very good sa shape na ito, sa pag-conform sa ACE2 na enzyme. Pero later on, we have several variants na nag-mutate, and they actually are very good at holding on to the ACE2 receptor. Kaya nga, yung Delta variants, the Lambda variants are very good at parang madali kang kapitan yan ng sakit na yan. It's because of this one. Yung later na mutations niya, actually, class, are perfectly aligned to your ACE2 receptor. Okay, so yun siya ang parang advantage ng mutated na variants na Lambda and your Delta. Unlike the alpha, beta, and your gamma na mga variants, hindi siya perfect masyado na types of variants para sa cell recognition protein sa membrane, cell surface membrane natin, sa plasma membrane. Kaya hindi makakapasok yung pathogenic na niya, hindi masyadong makakapasok sila. So, kaya mas maraming deaths or the morbidity is actually quite medyo mas mataas na sa mga other na variants because they are better at this one. They are better at holding on to the enzyme na pwedeng makapapasok sa kanila into the cell. Ganun din ang substances that are allowed into the cell. They have to meet the requirements of the plasma membrane. So sila yung they are the ones that will act as the security guards of your cell. Ganun ka importante ang plasma membrane class. And diffusion and osmosis actually cannot happen without the help of these membrane proteins and the whole plasma membrane. So ganun siya ka-importante ang mga substances and the membrane proteins that are in your plasma membrane. Kaya siya dinidiscuss muna natin bago mag-diffusion and osmosis. Okay? So, balikan natin, bakit siya tinatawag ng fluid mosaic model? So, it's called the fluid mosaic model because meron tayo, it does not have a very rigid na structure unlike your cell wall na hindi siya masyadong nakakapapasok ng mga substances. And it's a mosaic because it has a lot of substances in it. So, embedded siya sa entire na plasma membrane, parang siyang ganito, parang siyang mat, pero in between those mats and the holes in your mats are actually something littered na we call them as membrane proteins. So, yun siyang nasa membrane proteins natin. So, that's your fluid mosaic model. Right. So, paano ba nakakapapasok siya ng cell? So, isa sa mga pwede nyong re-research is actually on page 82, which is on page 82, meron tayo yung bakit HIV is so hard to cure. That is actually using membrane protein. So, pwede mo siyang, this is actually, kung makakuha kayo ng PDF na copy, sorry, it's not working at all. Okay, this one is actually hyperlinked na class. Okay. So you just click this image, it will divert you to the YouTube na video about HIV/AIDS. So HIV/AIDS kasi class is very dependent on the integrity of the plasma membrane. Aside sa immune system natin, nasa plasma membrane din siya nakabase yung kanyang behavior. Okay, so there's a sample na question here that you have to answer na natin. Pwede na ninyong practicean. Okay, so ano yung lipids, proteins, carbs, and na nasa ating plasma membrane? Let's go to the structure of the plasma membrane. So ano yung mga behavior na possible with your plasma membrane? So, ito yung pinapagawa ko sa inyo sa Module 5. It's a mini experiment, pero it's not the one that you will have to write a lab report in. All yung gagawan lang ninyo ng lab report is the one in Module 6, which is diffusion and osmosis. Kasi gagawa kayo later ng sample na diagram for it. So, I'll be showing you paano gagawa ng isang sample diagram for your laboratory report sa Module 6. Right, so based on your observation, you will have to determine paano siya kapag pinuncture mo siya ng sharp point, what happens to the oil as the sharp object is withdrawn. Anong nangyari sa kanya? Parang magki-cleave yan siya kasi medyo parang yan siya sasama konti. And ano yung general shape ng oil? You will notice that it will shape, meron kang concave na na disc na parang on top of the surface of the water. So medyo siya, it's like a droplet ng tubig din on top of a surface, solid na surface. Pero it's an oil on top of a water na surface. So ano yung mangyayari sa kanya? You will have to do that first para maintindihan niyo yung concept ng phospholipid layer. Right? So let's go to ano yung effect ng temperature. Unsaturation means the fatty acids in it. And ano yung gamit ni cholesterol within your plasma membrane. Ma'am, ano naman tayo cholesterol sa tuwang plasma membrane. Plus, even if you do not consume fatty foods, your body actually creates the cholesterol kasi it requires cholesterol. So, it's needed by the body. So, kahit hindi ka kakain ng itlog, the egg yolk is actually very rich in cholesterol. That's 350 milligrams, depende kung gaano kalaki ang egg mo. So, if it's an egg, masyadong malaki na egg, then the higher the cholesterol content is. Kaya nga sa mga natanggalan na ng gallbladder or yung they are undergoing treatment for their liver, they are the ones that are in low-fat diets. So, yan siyang inaano namin as dietitians sa hospital. Alright? So, let's go to, balikan natin, ano yung composition. This time, meron na tayong percentage. Gaano kalaki sa portion ng human na cell membrane, plasma membrane, ang mga biomolecules. So, pinakamalaki class is your protein. Okay, remember that the entire plasma membrane is actually littered with your membrane proteins, yung pinakilala ko sa inyo kanina. And we have also, just a few of it, meron tayong 40% lipids. The lipids actually class is made up of cholesterol. You have your unsaturated na fatty acids. And sa unsaturated, they are the ones that has double bonds. And we have your saturated fatty acids, saturated because they are saturated with hydrogen, yung carbon structure niya. So, wala siyang double bonds. Single bonded lang siya lahat. Kaya siya saturated. Okay, yan siyang term. And the last one is we have your carbohydrates. This is very few lang, pero ginagamit kasi siya ni cell for recognition of pathogens. So, medyo kailangan din siya. So, we have your carbohydrates, which is just 10% only. Okay, so, sorry. Alright. Okay, so let's go to structure of the phospholipid. Balikan natin in page 80. So, di ba meron tayo yung hydrophilic na head and we have the hydrophobic tail. Okay, remember then that the fatty acids are the ones that are responsible kung bakit ayaw ni malaking portion ng plasma membrane mo ang ayaw ng tubig or anything that is dissolved in water. So, sila yung parang nagre-repel ng majority of the substances out of the cell or hindi makakalabas kaagad-agad out of the cell. And we have also the hydrophilic region, this one, the head, that will be attracting water. So this is inside the cell is actually an aqueous solution which we call the cytoplasm or the cytosol. Cytosol, if it's referring to the fluid, if it's the content of the cell, it's the cytoplasm. Okay, so yan siyang nasa loob ng ating cell. This is your plasma membrane. Okay, so the components of the cell membrane is, meron tayo yung membrane proteins kanina na sinabi ko. We have the carriers. Okay, we have also the channel proteins, and we have the receptor proteins. Pwede niyo yung basahin on your free time. So you just download the copy of the PDF for this. We have also this one na mga types of cell membrane na proteins. We have the spectrins, the clathrins. Spectrins and clathrins class, ginagamit yan siya for ginagamit natin yan siya for facilitative and active transport. Mainly the active transport requires energy siya. So these are very special na types of components of the cell membrane that requires energy. So these are the types of cellular receptor proteins. So ito yung pwedeng makapapasok ng substances kay cell. So meron tayong cell surface receptors, meron tayo yung cell surface na identity marker, makikilala ni cell na kauri niya pala. We have cell adhesion, yung junction natin, like magdidikitan yung mga cells because they form tissues. Okay. And we have the ones that will attach to cytoskeleton, parang for the shape of the cell. Okay, so these are the membrane proteins that you have for the cell. Right? So the ones that is italicized, naka-italics, are actually the keywords for this membrane proteins. Alright. So meron tayo yung mga types of membrane proteins. Balikan natin kanina. Meron tayo yung the ones that will act as enzymes, the ones that will act as cell signals, the one na halimbawa, merong substance na kailangan nasa labas lang siya ng cell, pero kailangan niya ang help ni cell para ma-activate siya na substance. So usually yan siya ang ginagamit for changing the substance activation or inactivation, deactivation, ganun siya ang gamit ng cell signaling natin. We have the ones that will attach your cell to the cytoskeleton or extracellular matrix. May kasi tayo substances outside of the cell, fibroblasts, na makahelp ng shape ng tissues natin. The organs actually, class, are shaped by something. So they are actually, meron tayo yung parang nag-help sa kanila. The membrane proteins embedded in your plasma membrane. And meron din tayo yung transport na proteins and intercellular joining natin. So yan ang mga gamit ng ating membrane proteins. Meron din tayo yung glycoproteins and glycolipids. Okay, let's discuss these two. Okay, ang dalawa kasi has different functions. Si glycoprotein class is self-recognition. Halimbawa, may other ka na cell, didikit siya kay cell-by-cell adhesion ng mga membrane proteins. So, paano niya makikilala na kauri mo siya? So, ang gagamitin niya is actually a glycoprotein kasi yun ang gagamitin niya. And ginagamit natin to sa histocompatibility natin na complex. So, class, ang histocompatibility, ginagamit niya na yan na term for, halimbawa, nag-donate ka ng organ to somebody. May itinetest kasi yan siya na markers ang mga doctors or lab technicians to determine whether dawaton na sa imuhang body kana siya na organ or not. And the test for that is actually an MHC na protein na test. So, it's actually, halimbawa, if it's, the marker is 6 or 7 na rating, so if it's 6 or 7 na rating, that's quite high. So, it's actually expected na your body will not reject that certain organ. So, yan siyang, or halimbawa, it's blood. So, meron tayo, kung halimbawa, blood siya, class, ang gagamitin is a glycolipid na recognition na type ng proteins. So, tissue recognition is ABO na blood group markers, yan siya. Yung nasa labas ng ating blood. So, halimbawa, type AB ka ba? Kagaya sa akin ay type AB. Merong type A, type B, type O. So, those are blood group markers. Ang gagamitin na sa glycolipid. Yung naman class, glycoproteins, halimbawa mag-transfer ng mga organs, so it's a major histocompatibility na complex protein. So MHC. So yan siya na test ang gagamitin. Alright? So another time, halimbawa, may combination ka. Halimbawa, it's meron kang glycoproteins, glycolipids outside of the cell or embedded in throughout your plasma membrane. So the collective term for that is what we call as the glycocalyx. So glycocalyx means it's a sugar coating kasi nasa labas kasi yan sila. So para siyang sa donut, yung parang puti na na confectionery na sugar. So that's the term for it. The sugar coating, so it's for your cell, ang tawag sa kanila, it's the glycocalyx. So very important yan sila for cell identification, self and non-self determination, embryonic development, cell-to-cell attachment. So yan siyang gagamitin. And very hydrophilic yan siya. Carbohydrate molecules kasi class are very attracted to water. Kaya nga yung mga substances that are actually sugary, pag iiwan mo yung asukal sa labas, it actually parang nagme-melt, medyo watery, and it's because the water in the atmosphere sa air is actually attracted towards your lump of sugar na exposed sa air. So, kaya siya medyo nagme-melt yung sugar outside. Kaya nga, di ba, we store sugar in container na hindi mapapasukan ng hangin. It's because sugar is actually very attracted to water. Okay? So, it will attract large quantities of water to the cell surface natin. So, kaya siya very helpful ang glycocalyx for the dissolving of substances in water. So, halimbawa, bakit siya kailangan ng water, ma'am? Nga nung tubig man dyan ang needed, ma'am. Nga nung namang osmosis of diffusion. It's because, class, si water is the universal solvent. So, kung saan merong tubig, andun din yung minerals, substances that the water needs. So, sila yung parang tagadala. Parang bitbit niya na lahat ng pwedeng mabitbit outside of the cell. So, yun ang gamit ng carbohydrates natin sa ating cell, plasma membrane. Alright? So, the fluidity of your membranes, class, is just like your oils. So, halimbawa, if it solidifies, class, so the permeability actually changes. So, medyo, halimbawa, medyo malamig ang panahon, or we have it's a winter na season, kaya nga nag-hibernate ang some of the animals, and most of the plants actually die out during that time or become inactive. It's because yung enzymatic proteins then in their cells are actually becoming inactive too. So, hindi na din siya masyadong nagkaka-move around din. So, hindi na, that's the time that they go into hibernation. Right? So, the movement of your phospholipids is actually, meron tayo yung mga, some of the phospholipids can actually move around too, pero very rare siya na movement. Pero it's actually possible na they can move around. So, halimbawa, meron kang membrane protein dito na portion, pero hindi mo siya mamumove dahil sa masyado siyang malaki. Okay, the one that will move actually is the phospholipids. Ito siya. So, ang common kasi na movement ng phospholipid, class, to move around certain molecules or to move certain membrane proteins around is lateral movement. So, pwede siyang mag-move around. Kapag nag-move around to siya, class, pwede din na may papasok na substances. Usually, it's a non-polar substance ang pwedeng papasok during that period. So, pwedeng maka-diffuse ang substance. Halimbawa, if it's a non-polar molecule, so by diffusion siya na pero ang kasi niya is, it's because it acts as a semi-permeable membrane at this point, so the process is called osmosis na at this portion. So, it's lateral movement, which is the most common na type. And flip-flop, ito siya, like, the top portion will exchange with the lower na portion of your phospholipid. So, ang tawag natin for that movement is flip-flop. So, it's quite rare. Very, yan siya kasi, it's not totally possible kasi na ganyan siya. Pero pwede siyang, it can still move around like that. Right? So, possible ang ganyan na type of movements for your cells. So, the lateral movement, class, is hindi siya masyadong mabilis. Hindi ganun ka mabilis kung sa atin, kasi kung sa naked eye. Pero ang movement, ang length niya is actually just quite medyo maliit. So, 2 micrometers lang, nanometers ang length lang per second. So, mabilis siya para kay cell, pero sa atin, it's not really like that. Pero it's this movement is allowing certain substances to diffuse in and out of your cell. Ito siya na kind of movement. Kaya needed ng phospholipid to move around. It's because it has to allow certain substances to go through your cell, to diffuse into your cell. Okay. Another one is that, bakit ma'am, anong naaman dyan saturated, ug na dyan unsaturated na tails, phospholipid tails? Bakit may ganun siya? It's because the saturated and unsaturated are the ones that are responsible for the fluidity of your cell. Mas marami ang nakakapasok kay cell kapag unsaturated yung hydrocarbons mo. Halimbawa, mas marami siyang double bonds in it. Kaya nga it's not, plus hindi talaga maganda mag-consume ng mga high in fat na pagkain like yung parang parate lang kayo nagkakarne pero hindi masyadong nagugulay, ganun. So it's not because it's just for your entire na health. It's actually at the molecular level, those saturated fatty acids actually contribute to the non-fluidity of your plasma membrane. So it's actually the reasons why the fluid is actually viscous. Yung viscosity class is in chemistry and physics is actually the ones that will explain yung parang medyo sticky or hindi siya masyadong nag-flow na type ng fluid. So if it's a fluid na medyo nagmo-move around siya, so that means yan siya ang type na parang accepted by the cell. Dapat freely moving siya na fluid. So, yan siyang kailangan ni cell. Okay, so sana mas kailangan ni cell. It's actually a mixture of both the saturated and unsaturated. So, si unsaturated class will actually allow certain substances to pass through like the nonpolar molecules para maka-diffuse sila into and out of the cell. So, the kinks actually help with the movement of the substances. Pero, kailangan mo din ng saturated. Kasi hindi mo at all times may i-diffuse ka in and out of the cell na pwede lang papasok at lalabas. No. So, kailangan mo din ng saturated hydrocarbon tails. Kaya nga, variety of food is actually number 1 na rule for nutritional guidelines for Filipinos. Eat a variety of foods every day. That's number 1. Okay. I memorized that 10 noon nung nutritionist pa ako class. Pero ngayon, dahil teacher na ako, hindi ko na-memorize ang all 10 na nasa guidelines. But number 1 is always, eat a variety of foods every day. So, hindi ka kailangan na parang balik-balik ang ulam at kanin mo. Okay, so ganun siya. Alright, so the fluidity of the membrane also class is dependent on temperature. Okay. Because of temperature, mainit na. Kuya, electric fan. Sorry ha, nag-ask pa kong electric fan. Kaiga na kayo. Alright, temperature. So class, ganito. The cell membrane actually remains fluid as your temperature decreases. Pero, there is a certain temperature that the cell can actually maintain its fluidity. Kapag it's too malamig, kaya nga namamatay ang tao sa sobrang lamig na temperature, it's because they will pack closely together. Parang maggahi na siya like, it's just like your butter or oil natin na iiwan natin like lard or coconut oil. Diba pag gising natin sa umaga, early in the morning, they form like parang matitigas na portion, parang pumuputi na yung oil mo. It's because of that one. So, ganun siya ang nangyayari sa body din natin kapag masyado nang malamig. So, parang nagpapack closely together na yan siya ang fats. So, hindi na yan siya mag-move around masyado. So, it affects the fluidity of the membrane. Okay. Kaya nga, actually, meron tayong trivia for that. During cold na weather, halimbawa, napapansin natin na for most of the hibernating na mga animals, they eat a lot. It's because they have to create a lot of fat inside their body. Hindi lang siya kasi for insulation ng fat during that period plus for hibernation. It's actually para to help for the cells to survive throughout the period of hibernation or the cold na weather. So, yun siyang ginagamit ng plants and animals actually. ang plants din class actually increase the unsaturation of their plasma membrane during kapag malapit na yung winter. Dahil sa wala tayo sa northern and southern na mga na mga continents at nasa equatorial tayo na region, so hindi tayo masyadong familiar with winter. Pero meron tayong periods kasi na masyado talagang malamig. So you will notice this one, masyadong ang mga plants medyo crispy yung kanyang cell wall, or halimbawa for most animals medyo yung fur nila is medyo pinapakapal, or yung animal mo at that point is masyado siyang mataba during malamig na panahon, because it's this point fluidity of the membrane is affected by temperature. So medyo na siya, fluidity actually decreases too as the temperature also decreases. Alright? So, ano yung gamit ng cholesterol natin? So, cholesterol is actually a type of steroid. A steroid is actually a form of lipid. Remember class, di ba sabi ko, fatty acids are just one type of a lipid. So, kasi the larger class is lipids. You have fatty acids, you have steroids. Okay, cholesterol is actually a steroid. So, it makes the membrane less fluid by restraining the movement of your phospholipid. Halimbawa, masyadong maraming, halimbawa, this type of cell is actually requiring not too much movement. Okay, so, that type of cell will actually dadamihan nga yung cholesterol doon sa kanyang plasma membrane, embedded in the plasma membrane. So, it will restrict the movement of the plasma membrane. So, diffusion of substances through the membrane, kapag marami siyang cholesterol class, is actually medyo restrained. Hindi siya masyadong nakaka-increase ng diffusion of substances. So, kaya nga, hindi maganda ang masyadong mataas na consumption of high in cholesterol na products. It's because it will restrain the movement of your phospholipids. Aside from that class, nalalaman niyo in quarter 4 that they actually block your arteries. Okay? So, yun siyang pangit sa cholesterol. Alright? Pero ginagamit siya ng cell. Kasi ginagamit siya for reducing membrane fluidity. There are certain na parang hindi kasi totally dapat very fluid si cell. So, hindi siya totally 100% dapat very fluid. Dapat hindi siya masyadong fluid din. So, ito yung ginagamit ni cell para to restrict the fluidity. So, hindi siya masyadong 100% fluid at hindi din siya masyadong madaling i-diffuse. So, para restrictive yung pagpasok at paglabas ng certain substances. Remember class, hindi lahat ng papasok kay cell are needed by the cell. So, it's actually dependent on the plasma membrane to allow certain substances to enter the cell. Alright? So, yun ang gamit ng ating mga substances. So, review natin ano yung components ng ating plasma membrane. We have 3 major na biomolecules. You have lipids. Okay, you have certain lipids. You have your phospholipid na bilayer, and you have your cholesterol. You have your saturated fatty acids too. And you have your carbohydrates and yung glycocalyx natin. And we have your proteins, mainly your enzymatic or your membrane proteins. So, yun siyang nasa plasma membrane natin. Okay, so yun ang mga functions nun, you just have to review later. Right. So, meron kayong activity actually that you can perform at home. Kung may printer kayo, you can print it out. You can construct a 3D model of your plasma membrane to make it look like a mosaic. So, meron kayong printable na PDF na version na available in yung Google Classroom to make your own plasma membrane. Para makita niyo siya, ma-visualize niyo siya, makita niyo talaga anong mukha ng isang plasma membrane. And you can download and print it if you have a printer at home. Alright, so this is a trivia. So meron tayo yung wheat. Wheat is actually your source of your all-purpose flour, your cake flours. So those are yung ano natin, the durum wheat. That's a very specialized na form of wheat. We use the durum wheat for your pasta. It's al dente ang pagkaluto. It's because of your durum na wheat. So winter wheats are actually yung ano yan siya, it's a type of wheat, triticum kasi yan siya na family. So, ang ano niya is, unsaturated yan siya na ang phospholipids niya is increased during autumn kasi it has to survive during winter para to prevent it from solidifying kasi your unsaturated, napapansin ninyo, sino gumagamit ng olive oils? Olive oils, you have your ano pa nga na type ng oils? Usually plant-based oil, except your coconut. The coconut oil kasi class is very high in saturated fatty acids. So medyo hindi siya maganda na type of oil. Kaya nga we as dietitians we recommend all plant oils except coconut oil or palm oils kasi matataas ang saturated fatty acids nila. So, unsaturated fatty acids for plants are actually increased during autumn to prepare for winter. Okay, so para hindi sila mag-solidify and they can still survive during winter. Para you can still harvest at spring. Okay, or near the end of winter. Okay? So, the same thing, your viruses actually uses glycolipids and glycoproteins, your glycocalyx. So, ginagamit yan nila on their cell surfaces to prevent our immune system to recognize and attack them. So, kaya may link ako kanina for HIV. So, yan siya ang ano natin kasi ginagamit yan ng HIV, ang mga receptor natin na proteins, it's the CD4, actually ang ginagamit niya, para to attach to the cell surface of the T cells. T cell is actually a type of immune cell. So, yan siya ang ginagamit niya para ma-deactivate niya ang cell at gagawin niyang machinery niya. Manufacturing niya. Okay. Let's go to Alright, let's go to diffusion and osmosis. Okay, this time class, doon na tayo sa module 6. Okay, sorry ha kung masyadong mahaba ang ating module 5. It's because you have to understand first paano nakakapasok ang substances into the cell. Okay, this time, it's the process of yung pagpasok at paglabas ng substances. Ano yung ginagamit ng mga substances na ways para makapasok sila. So let's understand first, ano yung concept ng diffusion para mas maintindihan nyo ng lalo ang concept ng osmosis. Okay? Para ready kayo later. Right, so diffusion actually class can be performed using perfumes. Okay. If you can try to do it at home, so kung if may perfume kayo dyan sa inyong tabi, you can actually try to spray it in the air. Okay. And you will notice that merong, upon pag-spray mo, masyado siyang concentrated. Like, if you're quite sensitive to, perfumed na products, like me, medyo, yung ilong ko, sa mga ganyan. Kasi may allergic rhinitis ako. So, medyo, siya, very concentrated. Makati siya sa ilong. And very powerful yung smell. And later on, napapansin mo, nawala siya kaagad. It's because of diffusion. So, diffusion is actually the movement of substances through a medium. So, commonly, diffusion refers only to your solutes. Ang solvent class, which is usually water, is yun ang osmosis. Kapag sinabi mong diffusion per se, by its own, si diffusion actually is just the movement of the substances in water or air. So, yun siya ang across a medium. So, yun siya ang meaning ng diffusion. So, another thing, di ba kanina, meron tayo yung perfume. Okay, this is diffusion through air. Yan siya na particles. This one, na example natin, is actually diffusion of a substance, of a pigment, in this case, in water. Okay, so for example, this is a beetroot. A beetroot is actually a type of a root crop. So it's a tuber. Kagaya siya ng inyong gabi, bisol, and your kamote. Okay. And kamoteng kahoy like your cassava. So the taro, gabi, your cassava is your kamoteng kahoy, your kamote is your sweet na potato. And your potato is also a tuber. So this is a type of tuber, but it's a tuber with a very powerful na pigment na red na coloring. So meron siya very rich in anthocyanins kasi siya na pigment. So this is your beetroot, which is placed in water. So you notice that at 6 a.m., so this is 12 noon, 6 a.m., ang ibig sabihin this is 12 plus 6, that is 18 hours later. So this is 18 hours later. You notice that the diffusion is actually andito na level. And later at 6 p.m., which is 30 hours later, so this is napuno niya na yung beaker ng kanyang pigment. So this is diffusion through water as your medium. So sino ang nag-diffuse at this na part? So diffusion actually, na ito siya na is actually referring to the solutes here. Ito siyang nakikita mo, yung solute mismo. Napapansin niyo yung solute is actually very pronounced siya because it's a colored na solute. So diffusion, tandaan ninyo class ha, it's actually the solute's movement. Okay. Osmosis class is the movement of water. So si water na diffusion ang ano mo. So tatandaan nyo din that it's actually the movement from a higher concentration down to a lower concentration. So bakit sinabi ma'am na higher, lower? Saan ang high, saan ang low at this point? Balikan natin yung sa perfume. Okay. This is your higher concentration. The time that you sprayed your perfume is actually, yun siyang parang the air around it, yung sa spray mo, yung pag first mo na spray is actually the concentrated na portion of the air. Okay, you notice that it's the highest na concentration because sa lakas ng amoy ng perfume. Okay, it's the same thing with this one, yung sa beetroot natin. Okay, notice this one here, ito siya, na this is a very concentrated na portion here. Pag sinabi mong concentrated, that means this has a lot of the solutes or the solvent na concentration. This is your solute na concentration here. Ito yung pinakamataas niya na concentration. Highest na concentration here. This is the lowest concentration here kasi wala pang beetroot dito na pigment. Dito na anthocyanin na pigment. So wala pa yan siya dito na portion. So ang ibig sabihin, this is high, this is low. Kasi wala. Remember, this is initial mo. So ang ibig sabihin, dito siya medyo magmo-move towards because it's from high down to low. So meron kang from higher concentration here, ito siya, sa inyong beetroot, down to the lower concentration here na walang beetroot na pigment. Okay? So, notice that as time goes by, meron kang habang tumatagal, lalong siyang nag-mix in towards this solution here. So, the movement is actually from higher concentration to a lower concentration. Okay, ma'am, nga nung kinahanglan na mo siya sabton? It's because class, diffusion is very common in cells. Yan ang ginagamit ni cells para mag-beat ang heart mo because you need calcium and potassium na levels na parating na exchange para din mag-work ang brain mo at makapagsalita ka, makapagsulat at makapagsagot ng iyong mga modules. Ginagamit ang diffusion and osmosis for that. Okay, at the molecular level, it is used and that's the one that will power the entire cell. Okay? So, walang photosynthesis, walang cellular respiration, walang living organism if at the molecular level, walang diffusion and osmosis. Okay? So, ito yung ginagamit ng cell na process to power the entire cell. Right. So, okay. Dito tayo pupunta, yung parang molecular na level na tayo. So, meron tayong, for example, you have a lump of sugar, you place it inside a beaker or a glass of water, simply just a glass of water, you don't need a beaker for it. So, you just place it, tapos napapansin ninyo that it slowly dissolves into the water until that you come upon na parang wala ka ng sugar na granules at the bottom of your water, at the bottom of the glass of your water, and you notice na the water is actually, halimbawa, ginamit mo is a brown sugar. So, the water actually has a very medyo light brown na siya na tint. So, actually, that's the time that will achieve equilibrium. From the word so ang ibig sabihin it's equal. So, meron ka ng equal amounts of your solute distributed in your solvent. Okay? So, dito siya yung concentrated. Ito yung concentrated, higher concentration. This is your low concentration kasi wala pa, zero ka dito. Halimbawa, this is meron na siyang sugar pero very little only and you introduced a lot of sugar. Halimbawa, ikaw yung sweet tooth, gusto mo ng gatas na matamis. So kahit ang gatas mo is parang Bear Brand na medyo matamis, gusto mo pang matamis pa talaga, nilagyan mo pa ng asukal. So that's you are introducing a more concentrated solution or substance into your pagkain mo. Okay. So yan ang nangyayari sa inyong diffusion and osmosis for the substances. So that's an example for it. Just remember, diffusion is referring to your solutes. Osmosis is referring to your water. Alright? Balikan natin yun siya. Okay, let's go to osmosis na. Okay. Ang kasi ng osmosis class na dapat ninyong maintindihan is that it is required by all cells. Okay. Kung bakit siya parating na sasali sa cellular biology, it's because si osmosis kasi ang ginagamit ni cell, hindi lang diffusion. Kasi si cell membrane, yung kanina nang describe natin na plasma membrane, will act as a semi-permeable membrane. Pag sinabi mong semi-permeable, ang ibig sabihin niyan, hindi lahat ng substances are allowed to go through. Even if it is allowed to go through, hindi lahat din sila na substances can be sure na papasok kay cell. Sometimes they are left behind out of the cell or they are left inside the cell for particular reasons. Okay, so yan siya ang ating iintindihin sa process ng osmosis. So, pag sinabi mong semi-permeable membrane, katutong na ibuslut-buslut, na pwedeng makalusot, but not that concept. Semi-permeability actually refers to parang selective na pagpapapasok ng substances, pagpapalabas. So, medyo choosy si cell at osmosis. Okay? Medyo choosy ang cell membrane at this point. So, meron tayong several factors that can affect the diffusion of substances across your membrane. So, ano yung pwedeng affect ng iyong diffusion of your substances? So, meron tayo yung portions like pwedeng papasukin the nutrients and the raw materials. Pwede silang papasukin kay cell. And those that are becoming as wastes of the cell are actually taken out of the cell. So, yun siya ang pinapa-osmose out of the cell. Ang pinapapapasok naman, pinapa-diffuse inside the cell through the semi-permeable plasma membrane is the nutrients and the raw materials. Okay. Unfortunately, because there are certain na mga cell recognition na proteins that are hijacked by certain na mga pathogenic hindi lang nutrients and raw materials ang makapasok kay cell. We have the pathogens too. Kaya they cause diseases in our cells. So tandaan yan ha, hindi lang raw materials ang possible. There are other na mga substances, foreign substances that can be allowed into the cell depending on the circumstances of the plasma membrane. Right. So, ano yung DAPA ang pwedeng makapasok kay cell? Okay. There are 3 important na characteristics na maka-affect ng kanilang entry or exit in and out of the cell. So, paano sila nakakapasok? Meron tayong 3 factors, main factors. We have the size. Macro refers to malaki. We have micro na maliit. Okay. Saan dyan ang mas madaling makapasok? Siyempre, yung maliit. It's because the size matters for the cell for it to allow it to enter. So, mas maliit siya, mas madaling makapasok ang substance into the cell. Yan siya ang general na rule. So, the smaller the atom is, the smaller the molecule is, the easier it is to be transported across the cell membrane, the semi-permeable membrane. Okay, next is we have the charge. Okay, if it is non-polar na substance, mas madali siyang makapasok than a polar substance. Tandaan yan ha. We have the polar substance na mas madaling non-polar na substance. It's because, balikan natin yung phospholipid kanina, mas makapal yung hydrophobic region than the hydrophilic na regions outside. The ones that are facing the intracellular and the extracellular space of the cell. So, medyo picky siya sa mga ganito. Gusto niya yung madali, yung medyo shoot lang down. So, mas madaling makapasok si non-polar substance kaysa sa polar substances. And the last one is solubility. Okay. So, kapag solubility class, we have your lipid-soluble and the non-lipid-soluble. Halimbawa, if it's a lipid-soluble substance, remember non-polar lipid-soluble substances are also non-polar. So, ang ibig sabihin, mas madali sila makapasok. Phagocytosis class is so easy for a macrophage. Sa mga gumawa ng specialized cell resume for your macrophage. Macrophage kasi can eat a lot, up to 100 na mga before it can die or it can be activated again to eat na naman. Okay, so si macrophage class is mostly ang kinakain niya are highly lipid na mga type of compounds. So commonly kasi pathogenic na mga molecules, they are layered with lipid na soluble na mga substances. Kaya nga mas madaling nakakain yung bacteria. Hindi tayo nagkakaroon kaagad na mga bacterial diseases. It's because very effective si macrophage for phagocytosis. Okay? So sa solubility pa lang, in terms of solubility, very effective ang phagocytosis as a form of immune response. It's because of the solubility sa cell membrane. Madali lang siyang makalusot. Okay, so polar naman, non-lipid soluble, like your viruses class is actually made up of a protein coat. Meron kasi yan silang protein coating and that's a non-lipid soluble. Kaya mas mahirap sa ating body ang i-deactivate ang isang certain virus. Kaya tayo, halimbawa, meron tayo yung seasonal na flu. Bakit nagkakatrangkaso talaga ako every year? Or halimbawa sa mga very susceptible, they really land on the hospital just for a simple na sore throat. Okay. So it's because meron kang certain na virus for that na nagkakakos ng ganyan. So it's because of its non-lipid na soluble na na coating ng iyong virus. Okay. Bakit madali lang akong sipunin? Okay, it's because of the rhinovirus. It has protein coating. It's a non-lipid soluble. So in terms of solubility, hindi siya madaling makapasok kay cell. So phagocytosis isn't really reliable for that. Okay? So hindi siya masyadong reliable for that. So medyo may other na forms of na pwede mo siyang gagawin ng cell para to deactivate those certain substances or to take in those certain substances. Alright? So, in terms of permeability, meron naman tayo yung levels of permeability class. We have very low, we have moderate, then we have high. Okay, in terms of very high permeability, pag sinabi mong high permeability, pinakamadaling makapasok kay cell. Okay, yung pinaka-effective na makapasok kay cell. And napapansin ninyo, ano yung pinaka number 1 dyan sa list? You have your gases. You have your carbon dioxide, you have your nitrogen gas, and you have your oxygen gas. Gases class has to be highly permeable na substances. Bakit? Remember class, you have to breathe in order to live. Okay, so you have to be very reliant on the permeability of your gases through your plasma membrane. So the diffusion of these substances is very much faster. Very much faster. Redundant na yun. Okay, it's faster. It's the fastest one na diffusion. It's because you have to need it in order to survive. Okay, another thing is you have ethanol. Okay. Most likely, at your age, you might have already tasted alcoholic beverages. And you notice that madali kayong malasing. It's because of this one. You have ethanol, it has very high permeability through your cell. And in terms of deactivation of that, it's actually considered as a toxin by your cell, si ethanol. So it is deactivated ng iyong peroxisomes in your liver. Kaya yun yung gamit ng inyong organelle na peroxisomes. So sila yung nag-aano ng ethanol because it's highly permeable sa iyong cell membrane. Madali siya makadiffuse. So ang ibig sabihin, you have to have a lot of peroxisomes in your liver para to deactivate the toxins. So, hindi siya ma-flush out din siya out of your body. Okay? So, remember that had very small uncharged na polar molecules. Ethanol is actually alcohol na form. So, meron siyang OH. It's actually a negatively charged particle, pero dahil sa it's very small, it's actually a 2-carbon molecule, F in IUPAC naming na-remember nyo pa yung chemistry nyo, baka kinalimutan nyo yung IUPAC naming. IUPAC naming is, the F refers to 2 carbon molecules. So, doon yan siya sa hydrocarbon naming natin. So, ethanol is a 2 carbon na molecule, so it's very small. So, madali lang siyang makapasok kay cell. Although it's charged molecule because it's an ethanol, so meron siyang OH negative. So, although it's a hydroxide, so meron siyang hydroxide na pero nakakapasok pa rin siya because it's too small. Kaya, remember very small, mas madaling makapasok kay cell. Another thing is we have the ones that are moderately permeable. Okay. Ang moderately permeable na substances are usually dissolved in water. Or we have the urea. Water is actually ginagamitan na ng facilitative diffusion na passive transport. It does not require energy class, but hindi siya, ang niya ng water mo is, it requires transport proteins. So, ang ginagamit natin for that is a type of transport protein called your channel proteins. We have your aquaporins. We have different types of aquaporins class. Sa mga nagbabasa ang kamay, medyo wet ang type ng kamay. Sa akin kasi I have very dry hands. So I have to have lotion kasi nagka-cracking yan siya. Parang nagpipeel off sa sobrang dry. The aquaporins in my skin is not really good. Okay, ganun siya. So ang sa mga naman, yung mga channel proteins naman na mga masyadong they are actually a lot for them. So, medyo open yun siya, kaya nagbabasa sila. So, doon sila nag-diffuse out. So, sa mga nagbabasang pa, it's either meron kang fungal infection, or you have your aquaporins are just really good at hydrating your skin. Okay? So, semi-permeability actually requires this permeability for water actually requires transport proteins called channel proteins na ang special name nila is aquaporins. So, we have 17 or 21 types throughout your body. Okay, ganun kadami ang types of aquaporins. Okay? So, we have also urea. Urea class sa mga magsa-study ng medicine. Hindi yan siya yung urea na yung ginagamit sa tanim na ginagamit natin as fertilizer. It's actually the byproduct of protein metabolism. Yung kinain mo na karne, isda, or the protein in your vegetables class, kasi may protein din ng ibang vegetables. So, yung byproduct niya is actually urea. So, yan siyang sa mga humans, the byproduct is urea. Yan yung nagpapabaho ng ihi mo. Okay, mabaho ang ihi mo kasi may urea siya na portion. So, yan siya. Another thing is we have very low permeability. Meron tayo yung low and very low. The low ones are the polar organic molecules. You have your glucose. Sa glucose class, it requires, dito na papasok yung active transport. It requires energy na papasok kay cell. So, dahil sa, napapansin ninyo, parang nagiging complex na yung pagpasok ng mga substances throughout the cell kapag masyado na siyang malaki na molecule. In terms of your glucose class, glucose kasi is a 6-carbon molecule. Compared to your ethanol here, which is a 2-carbon molecule, glucose is C6H12O6. That's the chemical na formula for it. So, ang ng glucose is actually, it's a really large organic molecule. And it's polar. Glucose, remember, is actually just your sugar. Sugar is actually sucrose, your table sugar. So, that's 2 molecules of glucose. So, yan siya? It's a disaccharide. Okay? So, meron tayo yung niya na yung sa glucose mo na kapag papasok yan sa class, may requirement pa yan siya na iba, and it requires energy too. So, masyado na yan siya marami. That will be described in Module 7. Okay? So, paano siya papasok kay cell? Si very low permeability naman class, yung maraming mga drama para papasok kay cell, that's actually will be described in active transport sa sa Module 7. Yan yung mga ions, yung ionic compounds ninyo. The ones that has charge. So, we have the sodium, which has one charge na kasi it will require 1 electron, kaya siya positive kasi it will be requiring 1 electron. So we have you have your potassium, you have your magnesium, you have your calcium, and you have your chlorine. Okay, so those are the ions na required by your body. So sila yung very low ang permeability. Sila din ang nagre-require ng active transport. Notice that from low permeability to very low permeability, they will be requiring active transport. This one, sa moderate permeability, they will be requiring transport proteins, carrier proteins, or channel proteins to go through your cell. Okay? Cell membrane. So, ang mga masyado na talaga malalaki class, doon na papasok yung mga bulk transport or clathrin-mediated na type ng transports. Okay? So, sa Module 7 na ito siya. So, ang Module 5 and 6 actually class is actually this one. The high permeability and the moderate permeability. Yun ang nire-refer niya. But for Module 7 na active transport, this will be included in it. Itong low permeability na mga substances and very low permeability na mga substances. Yan siyang nasa ating active transport. Alright? So, yun ang difference ng substances. Anong type ng transport ang gagamitin niya. Okay. Balik tayo sa term na osmosis. Bakit siya a form of diffusion? Okay, si osmosis kasi class is diffusion pa rin, but it's actually the diffusion of your solvent, which is commonly water. Remember that water is always described as your universal solvent, and kaya we cannot survive without drinking water in several days because it's very needed by our body. Okay. So, dito tayo magde-describe ng diffusion pero in the context of osmosis. Okay. Sa inyong magiging laboratory report, ito yung gagawin ninyo. You will be describing osmosis at the molecular level. I-explain ninyo yung phenomenon na mangyayari. So, you have the first one. Yung first natin kasi meron tayo yung wispy trail. The wispy trail actually class will describe diffusion per se, by itself. So, it's diffusion of the solute, okay, across a medium called your water or your air. Pero in terms of sa experiment na yun, it's actually water as your medium. That's diffusion. The second one, which is on page 2, is actually the one that will describe the movement of substances across a semi-permeable membrane. And in this case, it's your plant cell membrane. Kasi meron kayo dyan, it's either pwede ninyong gamitin is actually pwede ang cucumber or a potato. Kung meron kayong patata sa bahay, yun ang gamitin nyo. Pero kung meron kayong pipino naman, pipino ang pwedeng gamitin ninyo. So, kahit anong vegetable actually is pwede ninyong gamitin as long as it's something that you can rub your salt into or your sugar. Kung wala kayong maraming salt, pero marami namang sugar sa bahay, pwedeng sugar na granules. Best if it's a brown sugar kasi mas halata siya. Mas obvious ang makikita mo. Mas madali mo siyang makikita. Alright? So, for this one, let's describe osmosis. Okay. Osmosis class is the movement of water from an area of a higher concentration down to a lower concentration gradient. Okay. Kapag sinabi mong high na concentration gradient, that means the water molecules are actually, saan sila mas marami at that point? Okay, saan sila mas marami ang iyong water molecules? Okay, so remember that, halimbawa, if the water is submerged, if your substance, halimbawa, your pipino is meron kang halimbawa, nilagay mo si pipino on its own or si potato on yung parang medium mo is water. Nilagay mo siya. Pero ang water na pinili mo is distilled water. Distilled water kasi class has almost negligible amounts of solutes. Halos wala yan siyang solutes. Kaya nga siya ginagamit for magtimpla ng gatas ng baby. It's because masyadong mataas ang concentration of solutes in the nasa milk ng baby. So, yan siyang mas ginagamit yung distilled water. Okay, so kapag nilagay mo siya in distilled water, that means ang concentration, i-compare mo yung concentration of water inside the cell and outside of the cell. So, dito na papasok yung ating diagram. Okay, for this case, I will have to show you a drawn diagram. So, meron tayong drawing at this point. So, ituturo ko sa inyo kung paano mag-draw. Alright. Wait lang po. I'll be showing you my screen muna. Alright. Okay, so I'll be showing you my screen. We'll go to camera. Okay. Let's go here. Ito siya. Alright, so for this one, you will have to identify ano yung ano natin. For example, meron tayo yung substance natin na halimbawa we have a cellular solution here na plant solution here na meron tayo yung portion na meron siyang substances like this one, bawa, meron kang solutes dissolved inside your plant, meron kang solute, kasi commonly, kasi plants have their own solutes inside. So, meron ka ding water. This is yung Mickey Mouse natin. It's actually referring to water. Dinodraw ko siya na Mickey Mouse. It's because you have one hydrogen, you have two oxygen na molecules. So, meron kang dalawa dyan. Okay, so kaya siya parang Mickey Mouse because of the oxygen na molecules. Okay, wait lang. Saan ang pen ko? Sorry. Alright. So, let's go to ano yung magiging movement ng substances for this one. So, let's assume that meron kang solution outside of the cell. Nilagay mo si cell in a beaker or a glass of water na merong sugar solution. Okay, compared to this solution, this is highly concentrated. Okay, compare natin ha, meron tayo yung we have here, mas marami, halimbawa damihan ko yung sugar na molecules here, damihan ko ang sugar na molecules, sugar na molecules, sugar na molecules. Okay, sorry class, magtakiro na tayo. Okay. Pasensya sa mga glitch. Okay. Alright. Okay. So, meron tayo yung natin, ito siya na portion, which is here. Ito. Mas marami ang sugar na molecules compared to the solutes inside your cell. So, the movement of water here, class, is always from a movement na merong higher na concentration to a lower concentration. Okay, compared to this one, halimbawa, if this is a highly concentrated solution, so halimbawa, high concentration ito ng solutes, and compared to this one, halimbawa, masyadong maliit lang ang water molecules. For example, this is a very concentrated. Bawasan natin ng, very literal yung natin, yung pagiging highly concentrated. So, bibilangan natin ilan ang meron tayong water na molecules. So, for example, you have here water molecules like this one. It's very little lang. Maliit masyado siya compared to the other one. So, meron tayo ito siya na portion here. Okay, you notice this one? Okay, sorry. So, para makafocus ka yung lahat. So, you have this one na portion here na masyadong maliit lang ang water molecules, and you have your portion here. Notice that medyo marami ang kanyang water molecules. Okay, so notice that saan ang movement ni water? Remember that osmosis is about the movement of water. It's not about the movement of your solutes, plant solute, the solution outside. So, halimbawa, saan siya talaga yung movement ni water? So, for this one class, you will have to understand it's the water molecules ang para kay, para kay osmosis natin. And kung diffusion naman siya, class, hindi siya, kapag diffusion naman siya, ang nire-refer is the solutes. Ito siya, sugar and the solute inside the plant. Ibalikan natin ha. Osmosis is the diffusion of water across a semi-permeable membrane. So, from a higher concentration down to a lower concentration. So, for this one, the movement of water is actually from this na portion and towards this na area here. So, it's going out of the cell. Okay. So, bakit siya lalabas si water? Okay. It's the water that will be moving around out of the cell. Okay? So, it's the water that will be moving around. Notice that meron kang ito, siya. You have your water molecules that is moving down from a higher concentration down to a lower concentration here, which is here, ang lower concentration mo, sorry. Kasi camera lang tayo. Alright, so meron tayo yung movement from a higher concentration down to a lower concentration. So hindi siya, yung parang substances mo here is not, hindi yan siya ang nire-refer ng diffusion at osmosis mo. It's actually the water. Si water ang mag-move around through the semi-permeable membrane. Remember, high ang permeability ng water compared to your sugar and solutes. Solutes actually, class, are usually charged particles. They are polar particles. So, ang ibig sabihin, they are most likely not allowed to go through kaagad-agad through your cell membrane. So, they will require special cell membrane proteins just to go through. So, you will notice that one. So, sa inyong mga magiging diagrams, most likely, you will have no sugar, no water molecules here. Okay? Yan siyang magiging magiging product ninyo. Wala kang sugar wala kang water molecules outside of the cell. So you will have high concentration of solutes here, pero you will have a very low concentration here of your water. Okay? So dito siya ang magiging high na concentration sa kabila. Alright? Ang high na concentration will be here sa kabila of your water. Alright? So the movement will be from here na portion sa inyong left side towards the right side, which is the outside of the cell. Okay, what if, ma'am, baliktad siya? This time, ito siya na solution is actually walang water, walang solutes, pero pure distilled water. Okay, what if water to siya lahat? So, let's go to Mickey Mouse na naman. Okay. So, what if siya, ma'am, pure siya na water? And this time, punuin natin to siya ng Mickey Mouse. Okay, so this will be your water molecules here. Sorry. Balik tayo again. Sorry. Alright, balik tayo. Dapat itap ko siya parate. Alright, so this will be your water molecules here. And compared to this portion here, mas maliit ang water molecules. Okay, nandyan na siya. So what if ganyan na siya? So ang movement naman, ng net movement naman ng water, ang osmosis naman, class, is, ang movement naman niya at this point, class, is from a high concentration, which is on your right side of water, down to a low concentration, which is your, the side here, na nasa loob ng iyong cell. So ang movement na is, hindi ganito ang arrow mo. Okay? So hindi na ganyan ang arrow natin. So the movement of our arrow is here na. Alright? So yan ang magiging movement ng substances. So na mapapansin ninyo, yung sa first na first natin na ginawa kanina, the movement is actually reminiscent of your yung laboratory natin. It's because that one will explain yung parang lalabas yung tubig out of your cell. Parang napapansin ninyo kapag nagawa niyo na iyon, yung magtutubig yung outside of your pipino or your potato or any of your starchy na vegetable. So medyo siya, mag-watery na siya outside. It's because the sugar molecules will be the ones to attract the water out of the cell. Hindi lang siya because the sugar molecule is a highly polar substance na ang polarity niya actually is the one that will draw water out of the cell. It's also because of osmosis. It's because the higher concentration doon kanina sa loob ng cell, higher ang concentration ng water and walang masyadong moisture or water outside ng cell. Pero in this case, halimbawa, nag-submerge ka ng gulay sa tubig. Bakit plumper ang gulay? Nagiging parang crispy na siya sa tubig after you submerge it in water. It's because of this one class. Ito na naman yung solution natin. At this point, hindi na siya solution na ganyan. So this is already your water na. Halimbawa, at this point, ito siya kasi is already distilled water. Sorry again. Mabilis siya mag-switch back. Okay, so this is distilled water. Okay, so this is distilled water na siya. Alright? So, halimbawa kung distilled water ka na, napapansin mo, they will move into the cell of your plant and medyo crispy na siya at medyo plumper na ang iyong plant na cell. So, medyo turgid na siya, medyo crispy na siya, ma-feel mo siya na parang matigas na siya. Turgid ang term dyan, yan siya ang correct na term for matigas na siya ang cell ng plant or the plant itself is already medyo crispier na. Okay? So, yan ang paggawa ng diagram for your laboratory report. So, pwede niyo siyang actually i-change class and there is a sample for this in your Google Classroom kasi may na-draw ako na binigay ko sa inyo na nandyan sa Google Classroom. You can go back to it or you can wait for the upload mamaya sa i-upload ko sa YouTube mamaya para sa ating recorded na version for this class. Okay? So let's go back to our presentation. Okay, I'll resume presenting this one. Okay, let's stop this one na. All right. Okay. So let's go back here. All right. Balik tayo sa ating diffusion na topic dito. So for this one, you will notice class na meron tayo yung ito siya. So this is actually diffusion, pero diffusion of water molecules. For example, so halimbawa nilagay natin halimbawa, the movement of your substances here is actually lumabas siya out of the cell. So probably this is an area which is meron kang low concentration of water molecules. So for example, like that, medyo higher ang concentration of water molecules for this one. So notice that the movement is out of the cell. Halimbawa naman, kung the substances is medyo quite your water molecules naman is yung distilled water naman ang nilagay natin. So ang ibig sabihin, meron tayo yung water molecules that is high in concentration sa labas ng cell compared to the inside of the cell. So the inside of the cell, meron siyang dissolved na solutes compared to the distilled water na walang dissolved na solutes, very negligible ang amount. Negligible means halos wala. Okay, so almost nada. So ang niya is, ang higher na concentration means outside of the cell, so it will go inside of the cell. So ganun ang movement ng water. So just remember class, semi-permeability actually is just selective na entry and exit of some substances in and out of the cell. And particularly, semi-permeability refers to water na movement, so it's about osmosis. Pero although we use the term diffusion or osmosis parang interchangeably, you just need to understand diffusion is about solutes na movement from high to low concentration. Osmosis is about movement, diffusion of water na molecules from a high concentration down to a low concentration. So, sa inyong mga experiments, lab na experiments, the ones that will have a higher na potential gradient, higher water na potential gradient, is actually the inside of your plant cells. So, sa page 2 ninyo, yung inside of your plant cells kasi, di ba, ang irab lang ninyo sa inyong plant, na sa inyong pipino is actually just plain sugar. So, ang ibig sabihin, wala kang i-introduce na water. So, higher ang potential gradient ng higher, kasi higher ang concentration, kasi may tubig talaga ang lahat ng plants. So, lalabas talaga si tubig out of the cell to dissolve the area na walang tubig. Okay? So, remember that sugar is actually a highly polar na substance and it will attract water. So, ang ibig sabihin, it will draw water out of the cell. So, it's by osmosis that the water is drawn out of the cell. It's because the water inside your plant cell has a higher potential gradient. Kasi mas mataas ang concentration ng water compared sa outside. Kasi wala kang i-introduce na water doon sa labas. 'Di ba, sugar lang siya na molecules. So, pag sugar lang siya na molecules, wala yan siyang tubig. So, i-rub mo lang siya doon. Kaya may rub tayo kasi we have to introduce pressure. Saan ang mas mabilis makapalabas ng tubig? You just leave it out sa ibabaw niya or you just rub it. Saan ang mas mabilis maglabas si water? So, actually, it's the pressure that will increase the rate of your osmosis. So, you will notice that kasi you will be timing it. Remember, di ba may ano yan siya na tingnan nyo kung gaano kabilis. Okay? So, that's part of your inyong mga gagawin para sa inyong module 6, which is on page 2. Alright? So, what happens when osmosis has reached a maximum diffusion point? What if the level of diffusion is already equal on both sides? There is equal amounts of water compared to the inside and outside of the cell. So, halimbawa, equal na yan siya. Pero may ano pa rin, movement of diffusion of substances in and out through your plasma membrane. So, ang tawag natin for that is dynamic equilibrium. The term equilibrium lang kasi, class, is just, it's a misnomer. Hindi yan siya yung tama na term. Ang tinatawag natin sa biology is dynamic because there is still moving of substances. Diffusion of substances, pero meron pa rin nangyayari. But the substances are actually just on equal na proportion inside and outside of the cell. So, meron ka pa rin equal concentration. So, the term for that is dynamic equilibrium. Okay? So, for that. So, meron kang no overall change in concentration kasi equal na on both sides. Pero, the moving of your molecules is they are still moving across randomly pero walang change of concentration anymore. So, ganun siya ang term na dynamic equilibrium. So, ma-achieve lang yan siya, class, kapag napansin niyo na yan siya, kapag wala na masyadong lalabas na tubig out of your pipino or your potato, and the sugar molecules outside are actually medyo dissolved na siya from the water going out of the pipino or your potato. Okay, so ganun siya ang mapapansin ninyo sa experiment in page 2. Alright, so this is your example of dynamic equilibrium, this one. So before dynamic equilibrium, you have your gradient na concentrations, difference in gradient concentrations. Okay, this is your high na gradient concentration kasi ang nire-refer na gradient dito is the red na colored na molecules. So this is high and this is low. Ito siya. And you will notice that at the end, when achieving dynamic equilibrium, equal na siya yung parts ng concentration gradients. You have equal here, you have equal amounts here outside and equal amounts here inside. So, ganun siya ang mangyayari after diffusion of substances. Okay? So, if it's across a semi-permeable membrane, we call it osmosis. And if it's about water, it's osmosis. If it's about solutes, the term is diffusion. Alright? So, ganito din ang gamit ng inyong semi-permeable membrane. You will notice, class, you have here example of your diagram. Also, it's almost the same with your diagram. Your diagram will be like this, class, ha? Kasi you have from the start, meron kayong dalawa dyan na diagram sa inyong module. Meron kang start and you have after. Okay? Meron kang beginning and ending na story. So, ano yung magiging start mo? Ano yung nasa loob? Halimbawa, this one, kailangan mong i-describe ano yung nasa loob ng iyong water. Sino ang high concentration? Si water ba or si solute? And this one here, dapat ma-describe nyo din. Required yun sa inyong, kasi class, magtulungan kayo as a class. Para magturuan kayong lahat. So, meron kayong describe nyo ito dito at i-describe nyo din ang outer. Okay, that's the start. Yung parang setup. Okay, start of the setup, you have to describe here ano yung nasa labas of the cell and you have here nasa loob ng cell. So, you have here your sugar molecules or salt molecules outside. And you have the sugar salt solution here na merong dissolved na water here. And you have here no water outside. So that's your first na box na pinapadraw ko sa inyo. So you have to describe to this broken line. Okay, the broken line will represent your cell membrane, which is a semi-permeable membrane. Okay, so you have here also, after a few minutes or few hours, most likely minutes kayo, class, kasi konti lang naman ang time na i-google nyo for that experiment because it's a mini experiment too. So you have there, meron na kayong i-describe as dynamic equilibrium. So anong mangyayari? Saan ba ang movement ng water molecules? Remember, the one that you will be describing for the laboratory setup for osmosis is the movement of your water molecules. So, meron kang after na diagram. So, dalawang diagram ang required for your osmosis. For your diffusion too, kailangan mo din ng dalawang diagram, pero you have to be very careful about it kasi sa diffusion in your class, wala kayong semi-permeable membrane for that. Kasi you don't have osmosis for that. It's simply diffusion. Okay? So, yun siya ang nasa ating page 1. So, you have to be very careful sa inyong diagram sa page sa diffusion and osmosis. Okay? Balikan nyo lang tong na video later. Alright. So, ano yung examples natin ng diffusion? Okay. In the sa nutrition and dietetics na level natin, anong gamit ng diffusion in our bodies? So, ginagamit natin siya, class, in plants and animals, mainly for, halimbawa, sa small intestines natin. As animals, we use it for the yung pang-ano natin ng digestion of our food materials, raw materials natin from our food. So, the movement is from the small intestine into the blood. Kasi higher ang concentration, usually macromolecules ito, so it will require active transport by bulk transport, phagocytosis. So yun siya ang movement. Or for other na forms like your fats or fatty acids, we have a very specific na type of movement for that. Meron tayong endocytosis for that type. We have also your lungs, ang gases natin will require diffusion too across a membrane. Tapos we have placenta, yung sa babies, placenta class uses diffusion. Okay, so we have food materials, waste products, and gases. Kasi remember, di ba, it acts like a parasite ang baby kasi it requires all things from its mother. So it's like a parasite. Okay, so next is we have your neurons. Your neurotransmitters, we have 20 of them. One of them is your GABA. Yung ano natin, gamma-aminobutyric acid. Okay, so that's your an example of a neurotransmitter. You have your acetylcholine. Meron tayong dopamine. Okay, those are examples of neurotransmitters. So they are actually moved across your synapses from one dendrite to axon to dendrites. So paano yan siya move across? It's actually by diffusion too. Okay? So the last one is we have your leaves. The movement of your gases na carbon dioxide and oxygen through your stomata. It's actually by diffusion too. And water is actually taken in by the roots. Usually the primary, the secondary or the root na tips natin, kinukuha yan siya including with the minerals by the xylem natin because it's the water na network. Okay, they are moved up and siya with the help of capillary action, and we have your transpiration moved up ng plants because of diffusion. So yun siya ang mga natin. We will be describing that thoroughly sa mga later natin na mga modules. So very fun ang actually ang biology after this lesson. Okay? So osmotic pressure naman class, ginagamit yan siya ng ating mga plants like very tall trees. They use osmotic pressure with the help of capillary action and transpiration. So this is actually used by them. So para to replace yung parang transpire na fluids out of the plant, halimbawa, mainit ang panahon, so transpiration is at work. So medyo meron tayo yung parang napapalabas na tubig out of the plant. So it will move water through the xylem up of the plant because of osmotic pressure. So ganun ka useful ang osmosis for plants. Okay. So they use that one. So they can move water up kahit gaano nakataangkad ang plant. So I'll be showing you that in detail sa quarter 4 natin sa nutrition ng ating plants. Meron kasi tayong special na lecture for plants nutrition. Okay? So let's go to passive transport ng osmosis. So this time we will be describing tonicity. So commonly, ito yung pinaka maraming misconceptions among biology ng mga students. Ano ang pag-describe ng hypertonic, hypotonic, isotonic. Okay. Okay, ganito class ha. Dito na-apply ang theory of relativity. Okay. So, theoretical na application of theory of relativity. So, papasok ang Einstein. Okay. So, dito tayo sa tonicity. Okay. So, we have the effects of osmosis in plant cells in this kind. So, meron tayo yung mga differences like this one. So, commonly class, this is yung pinaka-importante na concept for tonicity. Bakit siya about relativity? Kasi you have two solutions that you have to look out for. So, meron kayong dalawang solutions that you have to look out for. Bakit nagmo-move si water in or out of the cell? Okay? Yun ang tatandaan nyo sa tonicity. Bakit nagmo-move si water in and out of the cell? Ano pala ang environment ng cell? Ano yung pinaglagyan mo ng cell mo? Ano yung environment niya? Anong type ng solution na meron siya? Halimbawa, is it a solution that is quite similar ng concentration ng water and mga substances sa cell? Okay, if it is the same, so that's an isotonic solution. Okay, iso means equal. Okay, so ang ibig sabihin, the water will be almost the same lang siya. So this is an isotonic, ito siya, is actually isotonic, itong nasa middle natin. This is isotonic because ang isotonic kasi na solution class is normal lang na concentration compared to the contents of the cell. So, halimbawa, this is hindi masyadong maraming tubig, hindi din masyadong maraming tubig, hindi masyadong concentrated na solution of substances, hindi din masyadong maraming concentration of substances. That means they are of equal amounts of water and solute. So it has already achieved dynamic equilibrium. So ang ibig sabihin, hindi na yan siya, may net movement, ay may movement ka pa ng substances randomly moving across the membrane, but you have no net movement. So ang ibig sabihin, walang mas malaki na amount of substances going out of the cell, wala ding malaking amount of substances going inside the cell. So yun siya ang nangyayari sa isotonic. So this is an isotonic solution that is outside of the cell. So this is an isotonic na type. So this is flaccid. Okay. Meron tayong very particular na terms for biology. If it's a plant cell, and it's a cell that is actually normal na concentration lamang, like ngayon, which is quite normal lang na ano kasi it's cloudy na ngayon sa labas. So it's actually flaccid ang cells, plant cells natin ngayon. Another thing is, halimbawa, uulan mamaya. Okay, kapag uulan mamaya, masyadong maraming water ang available sa roots and they will be taken in by the plant. Okay, remember that at this time, mas maraming tubig sa labas ng plant kesa sa compared sa loob ng plant. So remember, osmosis is the movement of water across a semi-permeable membrane from a higher concentration down to a lower concentration. So ang ibig sabihin, halimbawa kung uulan, you will be introducing a high concentration of water outside your plant. So napapansin ninyo that the leaves of the plant during at this period is actually turgid. Or kung saan na sa atin, kung imo siyang pikoon ng dahon, it's crispy. Mag-click nyo siya, magtingog siya na mag-crunch. Okay, so that's your, halimbawa, that's the part na kung saan the plant is actually submerged in a very hypotonic solution. So this is outside of the plant is a hypotonic solution. Halimbawa, mas marami siyang tubig compared to solutes. Yan ang hypotonic solution. Compared to this one, your plant has marami siyang starch, marami siyang dissolved na substances like the minerals. So ang ibig sabihin, compared to rainwater, marami ang solutes inside the plant. So ang ibig sabihin, this is a hypertonic solution inside. This is a hypotonic solution outside. So the movement of water will be from hypotonic solution kasi mas maraming tubig sa isang hypotonic solution kaysa sa isang hypertonic solution. Tandaan ha, in a hypertonic solution class, you have a high concentration of solutes. A hypotonic solution has more concentration of water compared to solutes. Okay, remember water is a solvent. And osmosis happens about a solvent. Balikan ha? Alright. So, yan ang nangyayari sa isang plant na nagiging turgid, nagiging crispy kapag babaliin mo yung stalk ng isang plant, crispy siya. May crunch siya na sound. Okay, what if naman mainit na mainit sa labas at transpiration is actually happening at a faster rate? So, halimbawa, we have kailan nga tayo last nagka-El Nino? We had 2015 to 2016. That's the year that we had a very long El Nino na period here in the Philippines. So during the El Nino phenomenon, you have excessive loss of water. So water is drawn out of the cell. Remember, the moisture in the air during El Nino is actually very low ang water in the atmosphere. So water is actually moving out of the cell of the plant to be dissolved into the atmosphere. So ganun siya. So transpiration rate is actually faster during hot na season, tag-init na panahon. So actually, nasa wet season pa tayo, so hindi pa nangyayari yung mga ganyan. So ang nangyayari pa is this one. So ito pang mangyayari sa ating plants during El Nino. So this is during La Nina, commonly La Nina or rainy season, during the wet season sa Philippines, kasi mas mataas ang ating wet season than the dry season, or sometimes we have an unequal number of rainy and hot na season natin. So this is excessive na loss of water. So water is drawn out of the cell. So this is a area kung saan meron kang hypertonic na solution. For example, this is an area na masyadong maraming solutes, and this is an area na medyo walang masyadong solutes. So this is hypotonic solution here inside, and you have a hypertonic solution here outside. So the cell will be plasmolysed at this point. So the cell, meron kang excessive loss of water for this one. So plasmolysis happens when you have here a hypotonic solution, and you have here a hypertonic solution. So ganyan siya ang mangyayari. So for example, sa inyong magiging activity for osmosis, kasi it's about yung ano ninyo sa inyong ang mangyayari kasi for that is actually this one, plasmolysis. So you have here the inside of the cell is actually hypotonic compared to the outside of the cell, which is hypertonic. So mas mataas ang concentration of your solutes. Tonicity kasi class refers to the amount of solutes. Okay, it's diffusion. So hindi siya although osmosis is described in tonicity, it's actually dependent on the amount of your solutes. So this will be your for this one, this will be your hypotonic na solution, hypertonic sa labas. Alright? So, bakit tayo hindi pwedeng uminom ng seawater? Aside sa marumi na ang tubig ng dagat ngayon and marami ng microplastics sa dagat, so parang uminom ka ng tubig na maraming plastic. Aside from that, it's a hypertonic solution. So, halimbawa, if it's a hypertonic solution, it's actually ganito ang mangyayari sa cells mo. Ganito siya klase ang mangyayari sa cells mo. It will become plasmolysed. So, masyado kang madaling mamatay kapag iinom ka ng ganyan. You can't live without water for 3 days. You will die after 3 days unless you drink your urine just to survive. So you have here, pwede mo ka makasurvive without food for about 3 weeks, but it's actually water that is more important class. It's because ang hypertonic solution sa salt na sa seawater class is madaling makadraw ng water out of your cell. So the cell is actually depleted of water after some time of drinking seawater. Kaya nga yung mga stranded na mga tao sa dagat na halimbawa they are floating on jetsam and flotsam dyan. So ang mangyayari is that if they are tempted to drink the seawater, they will die faster. Mas madali kang mamatay sa seawater na yan. Aside sa masisira ang kidneys mo, the concentration of water inside your cells will be depleted na. Kasi the water is drawn out of your cell. Okay, let's have this one. Okay, saan dito ang hypertonic solution? Okay, let's imagine if this is your water solution here, and this is your sugar molecules here. Ito siya malalaki na circles are actually sugar molecules. And this is maliliit na molecules here are actually your water molecules. So let's imagine. So saan ang hypertonic? Saan ang hypotonic? Remember, tonicity, para malaman mo kaagad saan ang hypertonic, just remember, saan ang mas maraming solutes? Sino ang solute? Okay, sino ang solute dito? Si sugar. So, si sugar ang solute. Saan mas marami si sugar? Sa kay A or kay B? Okay, dito si B. So, saan tayo na side? Sa left or sa right? Okay, so ang tatandaan ninyo is that ito yung hypertonic because it has a higher concentration of solutes. This is a hypotonic solution because it has a lower concentration of solutes. So the movement of water class is always from a hypotonic solution to a hypertonic solution. So remember class that osmosis only happens about water, the diffusion of water. So, i-compare natin. So, ang movement is from B to A. Saan mag-move si water? From B to A. From hypotonic to hypertonic solution. Tandaan ha? So, yun ang magiging movement ng water. So, for example, nilublob mo ang tubig, ang katawan mo sa isang very salty na environment, like the seawater, naligo kayo sa dagat. You will notice that after some time, di ba nagpo-pruning kayo, yung parang, you call it prune, from the fruit na prunes. Alam niyo yung prunes, medyo, kasi yan siya, luxury na food. Okay, sa Del Monte lang pinakamura niyan. So, meron tayo yung prunes natin, nagpo-pruning, yung parang, siya, parang nagkukulubot. Yun siyang term. So, nagkukulubot yung skin mo. It's because you are nakalublob ka sa isang hypertonic solution compared to a hypotonic environment inside your cell. Remember, it's relative to. May relativity tayo, may comparison tayo for tonicity. So, just remember that compared to the seawater, the concentration of water inside your cells is quite higher. Kasi, ang seawater kasi class, mas maraming salt molecules or minerals ang nasa isang water na solution than the water. So, mas ang yung ratio niya is actually quite high for the minerals. So, i-compare mo siya, it's actually hypotonic ang sa body mo, hypertonic ang sea water. So, the movement of water will be from your body out to the sea water. Kaya nga, napapansin din ninyo, after maligo kayo sa dagat, you are parched. You actually, maghahanap ka ng tubig. Yung parang, ang tambal pag yun nato commonly is soda drinks, carbonated beverages. It's actually not good. It's actually best if you drink distilled water or drinking water at this point. Wag magdi-drink ng carbonated beverages. Napapansin ninyo, busawon mo after a day after or that day mismo, magbusisaw ka. We call it busisaw in Bisaya. It's because very low ang concentration ng water mo na-deplete na siya ng water. So you have to replenish it by drinking water or distilled water para ma-replenish yung tubig sa katawan mo, yung nawala sa'yo after naligo ka or uminom ka ng mga caffeinated beverages kasi they are diuretic, nagpapaihi sa iyo. So, napapansin di ba ninyo kapag sige kayo iinom ng kape or mga caffeinated beverages, napapansin ninyo parati kayong ihi ng ihi. Okay, so it's actually nakaka-contribute to dehydration. Kaya you have to hydrate by drinking a lot of water. You have to replenish water. Alright? So, ano naman yung facilitated diffusion? Last na ito ha. Okay. Facilitated diffusion class is just diffusion pa rin. Pero in this type class, hindi ka na across a medium like water, air. Okay. So, it's not across that. Hindi na din siya simple na diffusion of substances through the plasma membrane. No. It will be using the membrane proteins, particularly channel proteins. So remember from the term channel, it's synonymous, it rhymes with the word tunnel. Para ma-remember nyo kagad, it has tunnels like this one. So it will guide the substance through the cell using a membrane protein. Pero still, from a higher concentration, ito, napapansin niyo ito na area, this is a high concentration of solutes down to a lower concentration of your solutes. So it does not require energy kasi the movement is high to low. So magpa-follow lang siya ng high potential gradient lang siya. So ganun siya ang kanyang yung from high na potential gradient to a low potential gradient. So ganun lang ifa-follow niya. So walang energy na may expend. Yun ang diffusion pa rin siya of substances pero gagamitan niya na ng membrane protein. So tandaan ha, yan ang inyong facilitated diffusion. So it's actually movement of substances, diffusion of substances across a cellular membrane, a semi-permeable membrane with the use of your membrane proteins. So, ganun ang gagamitin for facilitated diffusion. Ito naman, class, is actually will be using energy. You have your enzymatic na processes. Ito siya, kasi yung gagamitin niya. So, this is actually gagamit ng energy. So, this is active transport. Alright? So, halimbawa, meron kang cellular proteins like this one. So, kung wala siyang gagamiting energy, it's facilitated diffusion. But if it's using as an energy, so ang ibig sabihin, it will be active transport na. Pero dahil for example, for this one, higher ang concentration ng sodium at this side, extracellular sa labas ng cell. Halimbawa, kumain ka ng noodles, mommy na noodles, very salty yun siya na ulam. Or kumain ka ng very salty na ulam. So, ano mangyayari sa cells mo? So, ang mangyayari is that you have a high concentration you're introducing high concentration of salt. And, compared to the salt inside your cell, hypotonic ito siya. So, magiging hypertonic ang outside of the cell. So, the movement of your water and the substances is actually, for substances like the solute, the movement of it is from here, outside to inside. Ang water naman, class, will be drawn out of the cell. So, from here to here, sa labas. Okay? So, ganun ang ating mangyayari. Kaya nga kapag kumain ka ng salty na food, you will notice or sweet, very sweet na food, you will feel na parang dehydrated ka, parang uhaw na uhaw ka. The term for it is, we call it parched. So, thirsty. Okay, so ganun siya. So, you will be quite thirsty after it. So, it's because it will be attracting water. It will draw water out of the cell of your body. Kasi hypotonic ito na solution. Hypertonic na yung salabas mo. Kaya nga hindi maganda ang parating kumakain ng very salty, very sweet na foods tapos hindi ka masyadong umiinom ng tubig. Or kung umiinom ka naman ng tubig tapos hindi ka naman nagsi-CR or umiihi. So, hindi mo siya napapalabas. So, it's just becoming more concentrated in your urinary bladder, ang ihi mo. So, it's not really good. Alright? So, this is an example of your facilitated diffusion. So, meron tayong yung movement from high to low concentration hanggang sa ma-achieve niya ang equilibrium. Alright? So, the last one is we have your aquaporins. Ang sabi ko, di ba kanina, it's the water molecules. So, aquaporins, class, they are allowed inside and out of the cell. The water is allowed inside and out of the cell. Madali lang sila makapasok because of the aquaporins, which is a channel protein. Remember, channel tunnels. Okay, they are tunnel-like na membrane proteins and channel proteins. So, they allow the water molecules to move in and out of the cell quite faster. Remember, water has high permeability. So, na medyo high na permeability siya. So, just remember, ano yung description ng facilitated diffusion? Facilitated diffusion is a process that allows selective movement in and out of the cell membrane using carrier proteins like your channel proteins. So, without the use of energy. Walang ATP, right? Okay, nakikita nyo, walang ATP. So, ATP is your ginagamit natin na energy for our cell. Meron tayong GTP actually, guanosine triphosphate. Pero ang common kasi natin na ginagamit is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so yan siya ang mas ginagamit natin. So kapag wala kang nakikita dyang ATP, that means it's by facilitated diffusion. So it's still passive transport kasi walang energy expenditure. Walang ginamit na ATP. So kapag maggamit na siya ng ATP class, kapag may ATP na ito dito, ang ibig sabihin, saka ka na magsabi na it's an active transport. It requires energy na. Okay? So facilitated diffusion. So it's part of the permeability of the cell membrane. So we will have discussion of your, meron tayong discussion ng ating, yung active transport by Sir Banggoy. I've already asked him. So siya yung magdi-discuss ng inyong active transport by October 27. So I've already discussed modules 5 and 6 today. It's because kailangan ninyong mag-prepare for the laboratory reports. Dalawa kasi ang reports na ipapasa nyo. One is for diffusion, page 1. Second one is for osmosis, which is on page 2. Tandaan ha, dalawa ang ipapasa ninyo and you will just have to handwrite it. Handwritten yan siya na report. Alright? So, sa mga mag-email, you just photograph your output. Okay, so, meron tayong mga ligand-gated din, yung the ones that are, it has to be activated first. Halimbawa, may susi pa ang gate bago makapasok yung mga molecules. So, meron tayong ganyan na type ng facilitated diffusion, ligand-gated na channel na proteins. Okay, so yun, meron tayong ganyan na types. Alright, this is aquaporins, channel siya. Alright? So, saan ang mas mabilis ang actually yung rate of uptake? Okay, as the concentration increases, saan ang mas mabilis talaga? It's actually simple diffusion. Ito siya, simple diffusion. Simple diffusion is actually just yung parang diffusion across water and your medium like air. Ganun siya. But if you are already using facilitated diffusion, like gagamit ka na ng membrane proteins, medyo selective siya. Okay, kaya siya nagpa-flatten na, we call it, hindi flatten, it's actually plateau. Okay, it's may plateau ka na makikita sa rate of uptake mo, and the concentration is actually nagpa-plateau din. Napapansin ninyo? Okay, marunong na ba kayo magbasa ng mga diagrams? Okay, balikan niyo yan siya ha, ang paano magbasa ng diagrams kasi you will have to be doing that sa mga next na mga assignments ninyo sa quarter 2 kasi more on mga diagrams. Okay, so you have here, nagpa-plateau din. Okay, it's because this will explain bakit hindi lahat ng substances class, halimbawa, andyan sila sa labas, marami sila, pero bakit ma'am hindi siya pa rin makapasok? It's because facilitated diffusion class is very selective. Halimbawa, kapag na-reach niya na yung required na amount na pwede lang sa loob ni cell, hindi na yan siya pwedeng papasukin. Kahit gaano pa yan siya karami, kahit gaano pa kataas ang we call it potential gradient niya, very high ang potential gradient ng substance na iyan out of the cell, hindi pa rin yan siya makapasok. It's because facilitated diffusion will actually be very selective of the yung parang entry ng mga substances into the cell. It actually helps in the permeability of the cell. Okay? So, yan siyang gamit ng diffusion na facilitated na diffusion na type. Okay? So, yan siyang parang help niya para kay cell para makapasok in and out ang mga substances into the cell. So, the simple diffusion class is actually not very selective. It's because it will not be using yung mga ano natin, simple diffusion kasi lang yung nasa setup ninyo in number 1, page 1 ninyo na diffusion. That's simple diffusion. Yung facilitated diffusion natin, class, is the ones that we will be using for ano natin, sa osmosis natin. Although may osmosis tayo na walang simple na diffusion, walang carrier transports na gagamitin, pero may mga, commonly kasi, osmosis happens in the cell natin. It will happen using facilitated transport. Facilitated na passive transport. Okay? So, anybody who is raising their hands, si Soliano, can you type your message sa chat natin, chat box natin? Okay? Para malaman ko anong reason bakit nag-raise ng hand. Alright, so let's have right. That's the last of our topic for today. So we will be seeing each other again by October 27. Pero this time, class, we will have to si Sir Banggoy ang ating ating magiging teacher for that day. So siya ang magde-describe sa inyo ng active transport. So he is teaching the subject na biology and physics for the STEM G. Pero dahil sa partner ko siya na teacher, magpa-partner din kami ng pagtuturo sa inyo. Okay, yes, Miss Soliana pala. Mic? Bakit? May question? Okay, if you have questions, you can PM me later kasi I'll be uploading this one too, mamaya, para makapunta na ako ng school. Kabalik ako ng school. Okay, yung mga magko-contest pala, sasali ng contest, please, wag mo nang mag-leave kasi we have to talk for a moment regarding the contest. Alright? So, hindi mo, tayo, we will be talking about yung requirements for the